buying something at a convenience store. On the news, they say that due to a dust storm, it's really hard to get a clear view of the sky that day, and the Jaehwan is just taking it easy, trying to buy some ruffles, but the bag is wide open. He wonders, what's the deal with that? And a little girl who was nearby asks if he's a thief, secretly eating the chips, and the Jaehwan says that's not it. But meanwhile, back on the news, they say that since the weather isn't suitable for outdoor activities, it's better to stay home. But then an emergency news alert breaks in, reporting a sudden earthquake on the outskirts of Seoul. For now, the earthquake's magnitude is low, and no one has been affected by the tremor. But the monitoring station said that the earthquake's magnitude is gradually increasing and announced that something must be done beforehand. Then everything that fell on the floor starts to shake, and they say that the government is going to do something about it. But then the broadcast starts to cut out until something appears right in the middle of the street in front of everyone. A huge tower emerges from the ground, and the Jaehwan tries to save the little girl. After the tower emerges, everything around is destroyed, and the Jaehwan manages to save the girl from the collapse, asking if she's okay while holding her in his arms. And she keeps calling him a thief, asking what that thing is, and when he looks back, everyone sees an absurdly large structure. And one of them appeared in England, in Japan, and in several other countries, including Seoul. In different cities all over the world, unidentified structures appeared, and people gave them the name Nightmare Tower. And everyone also received a notification saying they had been appointed as the walkers of the tower who will save the world. And the system asks if they will accept or refuse. The first of them to accept clicks on it without a second thought, and that window starts to glow in front of him. The people who accepted the summons fell into the tower's battlefield. By receiving the blessings of the interface system, they could obtain items and skills just like in a game. But they soon realized this was no game at all, and the system spoke to all of them again, saying that soon the tower's impact would occur in their world, and they start to see the outside, shocked that this is what the exterior of the tower looks like, and everyone is working around it. One of the workers asks Rio what that is, and up there they start to realize that it's a person coming out of it. And everyone starts to think it's dangerous, telling someone to call the police or something. And that thing up there is actually a demon, spreading its wings and claws to come after them. Its mouth is already full of frightening teeth. Then, it lets out a roar, and from that roar, several other monsters come out. And with that, the emergency sirens go off, but the destruction begins, and everyone has to flee. The army tries to do something, but against those gigantic monsters, they're crushed very quickly. Because of the monsters coming out of the tower, a third of the entire population was exterminated, and the people near the tower had no choice but to watch. And the system congratulates them again, saying they were appointed as the walker of the tower who will save the world, asking if they wish to accept the summons. And after that demonstration, they start wanting to climb, noticing that the message said they really can save the world. And if they attack the tower together, they think this nightmare will surely end. And humanity's last hope, the walkers, who gained special powers and abilities to prevent the end of humanity, began to attack the tower. At a certain point in their exploration, they come up against a rock they can't get through, and one of them asks what the problem is, asking if they can't just break it. But another one asks the guy if he really thinks the problem can be solved in such a brutish way, but one of them notices that it actually worked, and another one calls the team leader, telling him to take a look at something, and he notices a shiny stone lying on the ground. So when they pick up that stone, they discover it's the Stone of Return, which goes back in time and sends the user to the moment they were summoned to the tower. The user's memories remain intact, and the stone can be split and used separately. You really think a tower that wants to wipe out your world is just going to give you a go-back-in-time stone that easily, in front of everyone? Nah, that's not how cliches work. And they're surprised that you can go back in time using it, thinking that it can't be true. After all, how could such a broken item exist? And so the team leader tells everyone that he will use it and confirm it for himself. And that is Chung-Hoo Inin. He uses it. It glows in front of everyone, and he disappears, leaving them behind. And everyone is shocked that he actually disappeared. But they question if the team leader will be able to return, thinking that even if he went back to the past, they shouldn't still be appearing in the present. But Carl Han tells them that it might be normal, because Chung-Hoo Inin must have returned to the past of that world. However, since a part of the timeline was split, they can no longer meet him. And Carl Han started to explain what happened using scientific theories, such as the multiverse theory and the parallel universes theory. Their current situation is one in which the universe's timeline has been split, which means that the moment Chung-Hoo Inin returned to the past, he became completely different from the Chung-Hoo Inin who used to be in their world. And everyone there was surprised by his explanation. But Carl Han says he knows they don't understand what he said, and says that anyway, the only certainty is that Chung-Hoo Inin returned to the past. But just because he went back to the past doesn't mean anything would change in this world. And Carl Hahn says that, as far as he knows, the tower's items have never lied before, and that this stone will make them all return to the world in a split timeline. And of course, this is just a hypothesis. They can't ignore the possibility that everyone who uses that stone will end up in the same timeline. After all, the tower's items surpass humanity's common sense, and at that instant, the second impact of the tower happened in the world outside the tower. And with that, the monsters started to appear there again. And with all of humanity on Earth being annihilated, the walkers must make a decision, whether they will use the Stone of Return to go back to the past, or if they will simply stay in the tower and die. And apparently that's what's happening to them, with several dying as they advance through the tower, trying to kill a monster full of tentacles. One of them begs to be saved, but ends up being eaten by that thing without any mercy. And so they think that now that things have come to this, it's time to use that stone. But one of them still holds firm, and another says he's sorry, telling him there's no hope, before using that thing and vanishing right beside him. And that redhead falls to the ground, about to be caught by that monster. But then someone shows up and completely shreds the monster, saving the kid. And the guy who showed up and shredded the monster asks the kid if he's okay, and he says yes. The rest of the B-10 group arrives, surprised that all those bastards ran away. Then the redhead, seeing this, starts to cry, and one of them thanks him for holding out until the end. They were humanity's hope, the people who didn't fall for the temptation of the return stone and wanted to protect the present, not the past humanity's last squad. And that squad was called Carpe Diem. I think at this point on the internet, everyone knows what that means, right? But if not, just Google it. But then, that very same Carpe Diem, at a time not so distant from then, is completely wiped out, and the Jaehwan, at a horrible moment in his life, wonders where it all went wrong. A while before that, they were fighting the masked monster, and that same brown-haired guy charges at it and tells Jaehwan to go now. And the Jaehwan charges forward, telling him to chill, saying he's going to kill that thing now. They manage to completely shred the monster, killing it. After that, the Jaehwan asks if anyone died, and his friend says that thankfully, he doesn't think so. Those who were injured will also recover after a good rest. They say that at this rate, it might actually be possible to reach the final floor, and all of them are happy after the battle, smiling at the two of them. But the Jaehwan notices something on the ground, a dragon-suppressing greatsword. That's the sword that the Phantom Tiger, the master of the fifth floor, forged for 1,000 days and 1,000 nights to kill a dragon containing the energy of the sun and moon. And he realizes that a stronger weapon has appeared. And just like Chung-Hoo said, he doesn't know if it'll be possible to reach the final floor, but he's going to try. And he says he thought everything was going smoothly, but right now, he's totally screwed in the floor's boss room. That monster is face-to-face with the Jaehwan, ready to unleash a heat blast on him. And at this point, his friends are all wiped out nearby. And when he tries to look back, the monster smacks him so hard it sends him flying into the wall, splatting him there like a bug. And the Jaehwan starts coughing up blood. Then he thinks it's pointless and realizes that everything they went through together, all those times, was just for it to end in this pathetic death. But looking forward, he's surprised to see that same friend of his charging at the monster, trying to cut it, landing 2 solid hits right on the back of the monster's head. And he keeps hitting the monster, telling the Jaehwan to get up, and keeps screaming as he attacks. He yells that he can't defeat this bastard alone, but as he's attacking, the monster turns and impales the Jaehwan's friend on its horn, killing him instantly. The Jaehwan screams Chung-Hoo's name and charges forward. But the monster swings his friend on its horn and rushes towards a wall, slamming the boy into it and ending any chance he had of still being alive. And the Jaehwan, seeing that, is filled with rage, grabbing his weapon and charging at the monster. But as he's running towards that thing, he sees some kind of energy flowing to the tip of one of the monster's scales, and he wonders what that light is, guessing it might be able to help him. So he charges directly for that spot, attacks, and manages to finish off the monster, killing it completely. He starts to celebrate in the wrecked area, then goes over to Chung-Hoo, but the boy is lying in a corner, completely broken. He ends up noticing that the boy already has a colorless return stone in his hands. And the Jaehwan is really surprised, all while Chung-Hoo is apologizing to him. Then the Jaehwan is stunned, thinking, why? Chung-Hoo says that because he never stopped smiling even in this cruel tower, the Wanderers nicknamed him the Smiling Knight. He says that the Smiling Knight has lost his smile for the first time. Hearing this, the Jaehwan tells him to get lost before he changes his mind, and just like that, leaves Chung-Hoo behind. Chung-Hoo wonders if he noticed, thinking that the stone looks very worn out. With his last bit of strength, he manages to get up and thinks about the Jaehwan, saying that he's much stronger than he thought. And thanks to him, he's convinced that it's possible to reach the top of this tower. As long as he's around, of course it's possible. And he's relieved that the Jaehwan is in this world. Then he throws himself from one of the tower's windows, falling outside. Meanwhile, the Jaehwan reaches the final door, remembering everything he went through with his friend. But still, he thinks he needs to move forward, going to the next floor. Then, arriving on that floor, he's surprised by the glacier, noticing he's in a snowy field. And in the middle of that snowy field, the Jaehwan is facing several huge monsters that start coming at him, and several ice spikes form there. One of those monsters keeps chasing him, cursing at the Jaehwan, asking if he's given up yet. But then the Jaehwan turns to it, saying there's no fucking way he's giving up, and asks if the monster is tired of playing with him yet. And the monster attacks one more time, until the Jaehwan manages to get directly into a tunnel. The monsters keep looking for him, and from inside the tunnel, he can see everything outside. The monster asks if he's going to keep doing this useless thing of hiding. But then the Jaehwan, inside, tries to heal his frozen arm. He says it's been 10 years since he reached the 99th floor. And even though he went through countless crises on the 98th floor, the danger level on the 99th was incomparable to all the lower floors. So he suffers a lot from the ice. And the floor boss is the ice dragon, Velkus. And this dragon's breath, which came from the Forgotten Land, was hard to withstand, even with his cold resistance at the highest possible level. And he says that if it weren't for the equipment left behind by the wanderers who departed, he would have died a long time ago. The dragon-suppressing sword he got on the 155th floor, the ice demon armor that Yoon Ryun gave him, and also the thing on his arm, the bracelet of the Flame King. He thinks of Hanu and sees the girl right in front of him, remembering her and apologizing, saying that if he had been stronger, things would have been different. He remembers her death, but then someone calls his name, and he gets startled. Then, that blacksmith asks if he's thinking of facing that thing again. And the Jaehwan says yes, that he really feels like he can win this time. And the blacksmith, Jae, asks if that's true, saying it's a relief. This is the village that was established after defeating Temenos, the 4th floor boss in Adipose. And even though dead or injured wanderers arrived every day, the people never gave up hope, and the priests established emergency rescue units to save warriors who could no longer fight. And the blacksmiths in the workshops created free equipment for the wanderers who fought for the good of humanity. And the Jaehwan talks to Jae, saying it seems like he's the last blacksmith in Adipose now. Then Jae tells the kid not to even remind him, since he's the only customer he has. And more importantly, it seems like lately, there are no more supplies coming from the lower floors, because he's out of ore. He says there were still some ore supplies up until a few months ago, and the Jaehwan thinks that's to be expected, because there are almost no humans left living in the tower. And he says he doesn't know what year it is, but 10 tower impacts have happened so far, and from a certain point on, people were no longer summoned to the 1st floor's summoning field to climb the tower. He starts to think that the humans in the tower have been wiped out. Jae is speechless at this, but asks the Jaehwan if there's anything bothering him. Nowadays, as he goes up and down the tower, even though the tower is still the same as always, he says that, come to think of it, in the place where the return stone was discovered, there were some strange writings that spoke of a tower within the tower and a nightmare within a nightmare. He says it could have been written by someone else, but he doesn't know what it means and thinks it's nothing special. But then Jae says that 2 days ago, Grandma Rylene disappeared, and he says you can't get old inside the tower. And if someone disappears in there, it's for one of 2 reasons. Either by returning to the past, or by jumping from the tower. And Rylene, from the potion shop, and Jae, from his workshop, were the few support wanderers left. And Jae gets more and more apprehensive about this as he hammers his iron. And the protagonist talks to Jae, asking him to please teach him the blacksmithing skill. Jae immediately stops his hammer. Meanwhile, the protagonist sees that this was what he needed. And now, with the ice dragon, it asks the protagonist if he's done with hide and seek, saying that no human had managed to reach the 99th floor alone since the tower was created. And it says it will acknowledge him, because he is an incredible human. And the protagonist hates that the last thing to acknowledge him would be a monster and not a human. So he says he'll feel pretty empty after killing it. After all, it was the one who acknowledged him. But the dragon then tells the protagonist that's impossible. But the protagonist questions how it could know, since even that armor it's so proud of is starting to show cracks. But the dragon doesn't like what he's saying at all, preparing another icy breath, calling the protagonist's arrogance astounding, and saying that playtime is over. But as it prepares to attack the protagonist, he charges into the breath coming from its mouth, and the protagonist is hit square by that blast, and the breath sends him flying, pinning him to a glacier. He's almost completely frozen, covered in blood, totally messed up from the dragon's attack, and the dragon says he'll fight to the end, even if he tries to resist persistently. But in the end, the fate he will face is crushing loneliness. But then, someone is calling him, waking him up again, and several ice statues of his dead friends appear near him while the dragon talks about the emptiness he's going to feel. But then the protagonist calls out to the dragon, saying it talks too much, breaking free from those hands. From the illusion the monster cast on him and charging to attack once more with a thrust. But the dragon thinks it's already tired of that thrust, and, after all that talk, tells him to give up, because he can't defeat it with this skill. However, the protagonist goes for it again with the same attack, and he says that he started raiding the tower after other people had. And because of that, he missed out on things like secret skills and classes every time. And that's why he gave up on other skills and only focused on one, the thrust. And he pushed forward and forward again. And for having killed over 50 million monsters with his thrusts, his companions thought his nickname was Thrust, and he felt that this thrust was undergoing a change, becoming faster, more precise, and stronger. And as a result, the thrust stopped being a simple move and started to gain attack power comparable to a secret skill. And since it wasn't a skill, he never got tired, because it didn't consume spirit power. And even so, the situation is tough, because a single scratch after hundreds of thrusts is very little. He attacks the same spot on that monster one more time, but the dragon opens its mouth again to launch another beam. The protagonist thinks it's too late to dodge, but he feels something. While the monster is breathing on him, that same line appears in his vision, that light, and he thinks it's the same light he saw on the 98th floor. So, that being the case, he needs to concentrate with everything he's got, launching the strongest thrust of his entire life. And that thrust hits the monster's cheek, causing an absurd amount of damage to the dragon, which starts cursing him with its mouth completely destroyed for having lost an eye, asking how he dares. And the protagonist is surprised that it wasn't enough, saying that it should have finished it once and for all. But then the dragon opens its wings, telling him not to show off after a single hit, saying it's going to finish him for real now. Dude, look at the size of that dragon. I thought it was way smaller. And the dragon unleashes several of those breath attacks on the protagonist, destroying everything and trying to hit him. He escapes by a hair and can't believe the dragon is firing more attacks in midair, realizing that at this rate he has no chance of winning. But just then the dragon lands near him, coming down on its two paws. Then, it tells the human that it's a shame. Look, if there were 10 more humans like you, they could have defeated me. But the protagonist tells it to shut up, because it's acting tough even with its body all broken. And the dragon says that if his race hadn't been deceived by the Dream Demon Stone, his fate would have been completely different. And the protagonist, hearing this, is surprised, questioning this Dream Demon Stone, asking what the dragon is talking about. But the dragon doesn't answer, obviously. It starts attacking the protagonist without any explanation, and the protagonist jumps back, fleeing from the dragon. He goes inside a door, closing himself in, and thinks that was a close call, because if its claw had managed to scratch him, he would have died, since his HP is so low. But then he starts to remember what the dragon told him, completely wiped out, thinking about this Dream Demon Stone. And so, 5 years later, he goes after the dragon once more and finally manages to kill it, because he obtained the title of Floor's Nightmare. And his level reaches the limit. His vitality also reaches the max. His martial skills reach their maximum too, and his agility goes with them. Then he gets a little discouraged, noticing that too many windows appeared after he defeated that thing. But then he talks to the dragon, asking what the Dream Demon Stone is. And it says he should already know the answer to that question, saying that he'll learn about everything on the last floor. And he finally gets the Ice Dragon's sword, a black sword imbued with the Ice Dragon's breath. It is said that the sword's blade reveals itself when its master wishes to fight. He notes that it doesn't look like a sword at all, more like a dagger. But still, out of nowhere, a door emerges from the dragon's blood and finally, the last floor. And so he prepares to enter that place. But as he enters, the name of that door changes from 100 to Control Room. And when the protagonist emerges from that black ink, he sees something in front of him, realizing that place shows an image of everything he's been through so far. He notices that that's the current appearance of the tower, noting the summoning field, topos, and everything else there. Then, someone speaks to him, surprised that he's already here, saying they thought he would go back to the village first. But then, he tells the protagonist that he doesn't need to be nervous, because he forgot to send him an important message, telling him to wait there for a moment, because he'll be there soon, telling him to just chill. He says that even though this looks good on the outside, it's actually an antique, so it's going to be pretty hard to use. And so he receives a message right in front of him, congratulating him, saying that he is the first person to complete all the tutorials of World 294, and his incredible achievement has been recorded in the Immortal Records, the Akashic Records. And this record will only be visible to the monarchs of the Great Land. And the protagonist is terrified seeing this, asking what all of that means about it being a tutorial, with all his friends dead. And he becomes desperate learning all of this. Then, that person asks if it was too big of a surprise, saying they hope he doesn't stay surprised for long. Otherwise, he might end up being swallowed by his emotions. But he says it seems a bit late to say that, but tells him not to get so upset, because he did very well for a human. However, he notices something, noting that the protagonist is standing there unshaken, looking deep into his eyes, realizing that he recovered much faster than he had imagined. And the protagonist demands to know who that bastard is. And that tiger realizes he said so many things without even introducing himself, saying it's just that he was so happy to meet him because he didn't think he would reach the 100th floor alone. This has never happened before. He's saying his name is Beaslane, the demon, the master of the Tower of Nightmares he just cleared. And the protagonist asks if, when he says everything up to now was a tutorial, he means the real game is about to begin. Beaslane notes that the boy is great at understanding things, but first, there's something he needs to show him, and he snaps his fingers. Then he sees a memory of himself, questioning if this was a game, and the protagonist stares at it, terrified. And Beaslane says they were all so young, and it's been a long time since he's seen that. He remembers every single one of the missions they did, and says those are faces that can no longer be seen. And there, right there, at any moment, now, in that very moment, he says he's certain they never expected what would happen next. A terrible and tragic future. And he says he cried a lot watching it, then asks if the protagonist remembers everything. Now the sadness, the anger, the regrets, saying it's normal to feel such useless emotions when faced with the past. He says he'll give him a new chance, that he can restart this game. And he asks if it isn't an incredible benefit, saying it's the kind of thing that would only happen in a novel. He, an absolute being, can start everything over again with his current memories. So the protagonist wonders if this isn't the end, asking himself if he wasn't supposed to have saved the world after climbing the tower, because the message at the very beginning said he would save the world. And he realizes he was tricked by Beaslane, by that hideous thing in front of him. He realizes that from the very beginning, it was all a lie. They had no way to stop the tower's impacts, and the only thing they could do was keep climbing it, because the salvation of humanity was just false hope. But then the protagonist says he's sure that Beaslane knows damn well that he's not going back to the past, and Beaslane realizes, starts to laugh, roaring with laughter right in front of the protagonist, his mouth growing gigantic in front of the boy, questioning if he's talking about the past, saying he'll make things crystal clear for him. No item in the tower or on the Great Land can send you back to the past. He says there's no item broken enough to send someone there. And the protagonist questioned what he meant by that, because there was definitely an item called the Return Stone in the tower. But then he finally remembers what the Ice Dragon told him. If his race hadn't been deceived by the Dream Demon's stone, their fate would have been completely different. What a pity. And the protagonist finally gets it. Then Beaslane speaks to him, asking to correct something, saying it's not the Return Stone, it's the Dream Demon's stone. And the Dream Demon's stone doesn't send the user back to the past. They just get trapped in dreams created by the Dream Demon. And he couldn't even imagine, until they reached the 67th floor, that there was a race so obsessed with going back to the past. And the only ones with that obsession were Will and the humans. And the protagonist says yes. And Beaslane asks the protagonist if they're going to start the real game, saying it's not going back to the past, it's just playing the game from the beginning again. He says he trusts he'll make the most logical decision, but the protagonist rejects it on the spot, and Beaslane is completely baffled. The protagonist says that thanks to him, he knows what the tower is, and at that, something appears behind Beaslane. He looks surprised, and the information that appears is the name Tower of Nightmares Tutorial Mode. The explanation says it's also known as the Fortress of Regrets, the second product of the creator of Nightmares, the Dream Demon, Molark, and it places those who agreed to be summoned to the tower into dreams fabricated by the Dream Demon. He says he's already entered the Dream Demon's dream that the tower created. So, in that case, he'll hunt him down and finally proceed to the next floor. Whoa, dude, the guy's lost his mind. He's gonna hunt the admin, ban the admin from his own server, but Beaslane is confused about this next floor, saying no such thing exists, and this is the end of that tower. But the protagonist says he doesn't believe what he says anymore, and Beaslane asks if it's because the completion rewards were insufficient, saying that he's going to stick with his miserable memories just for some rewards. But the protagonist lunges at him with a thrust, tearing off part of his head. But Beaslane starts talking even with his head half torn off, saying it's all right, asking what he wants. A secret item? A secret skill? He says he'll give him anything, because he's earned it, but the protagonist says he doesn't need anything like that. Then he asks if he doesn't want to return to his original world, and says that since the protagonist predicted he was inside the dream of the Tower of Nightmares, he's sure he already predicted this, but there's no such thing as a tower impact. And the protagonist asks what he's talking about. And just like that, he begins to show him all the people, alive, outside, and the protagonist is completely shocked to see it, questioning what is happening. A train passes right through his body, and he just stares at those people living their daily lives. And Beaslane starts to laugh, saying he's finally understood the situation and that to think no one died Isn't it surprising? His family, his friends, for special people like him. He supposes this is incredible news. And get this, the guy he's looking at is literally the protagonist of Omniscient Reader, and he notes that this guy is reading something really weird. And with that, he turns back to the protagonist, saying he almost forgot to show him the most important thing. And he is taken inside a hospital where a doctor asks how the patients are, and another says they still haven't regained consciousness. And the protagonist, watching this, sees himself. And Beastlane asks if he isn't surprised by his appearance, saying that decades have passed, but in his world, only a meager month has gone by. And besides, he'll never be able to defeat him. Compared to him, someone who barely managed to finish the tutorial, there's a level difference as vast as the one between humans and dragons. And the protagonist starts to think that this is a relief, because if they're talking about dragons, he's hunted them before. And Beastlane says he's arrogant, but the protagonist attacks him again, and with that, he's once more back inside the tower with several potions. Then he goes over to where the blacksmith should be, but since everything is destroyed and abandoned, he begins to forge himself. He says it's been 72 days, including today, and he's challenged him every single day without rest. And no matter how he attacks him, he can't leave a single scratch. However, he doesn't die either. He doesn't know why, but Beastlane has no intention of killing him. And that's why no matter how many days it takes, no matter how many years are needed, he still wants to kill him. But Beastlane isn't enjoying this very much. After all, he has to restrain himself. And that guy is a product he's going to sell. A very special product. And as a cultivator, it's his first time seeing something like this. A cultivator ensures that a product will adapt safely on the Great Land, using secondary processes to enhance the product. And the primary process is selecting the seeds so that only the truly good ones are left. And that process is carried out through the tutorial to find good products. And with that, the chosen products can begin to truly evolve through the real game. And so, the secondary process is to provide water and fertilizer for the chosen seeds to make them grow. But if there's a product that refuses to advance to the next stage, you simply close your eyes and kill it, because your soul isn't destroyed if you die in the tower. But what if his soul is wounded? Could there be a difference between the two? And he's surprised by this, thinking of the superiors who are watching him, saying that the cultivators didn't just stand by. He has to raise him impeccably and sell him, because he thinks it's time to ascend and become a high-ranking demon. He also has to pay back the loan he used to buy that tower, and he's such a special product that even the gods who don't normally make deals with demons have contacted him. Beston starts getting pissed, thinking he's trying to drive him crazy. And the protagonist attacks him once more, and he demands to know what the hell he wants. Positive there must be a reason for him to be acting this way, seriously asking the protagonist if he ever gets tired of this. Because if he just listened to him and started the real game, everything would be so much easier. But then he says that people in his world would call this the best option, questioning why the boy is doing all this. But then he keeps attacking him, and Beston loses his shit, raising a wall between them. So he watches the protagonist from behind the wall. At that moment, the protagonist attacks while looking back, but ends up getting caught by Beston's hand, who starts begging him to please answer, questioning what he wants because he's telling him he'll give him items or secret abilities, asking why he insists on doing something so useless. But then Chung-ho says he's going to hunt him and proceed to the next floor, once again, like a Pokemon just saying its own name. And he gets pissed that the boy is saying that again, asking what he needs to do to get to the real game. And the protagonist thinks he's got him, saying that it was good he held out until he reached his limit. So the protagonist says there's something he wants to ask him, and after he makes the request, Beston tells him not to be surprised, saying that his universe isn't actually made of just one dimension. The protagonist simply says he already knows. Beston is surprised, asking if the kid is some kind of genius or something. He says everyone knows that, saying that parallel universes, the multiverse, that kind of thing exists on Earth too. So Beston says he'll explain in more detail. There is a main dimensional level called the Great Earth, and below it, there are countless alterations that branch off. And Earth is a small planet in a dimensional system separate from the countless alterations. And they call that planet World 294. And in the Tower of Nightmares, wanderers can gain abilities and items and enhance their attributes. They then adapt to the system of the Great Earth and get a chance to travel to another world. And demons like him have the role of supporting these games. Oh, I don't know about that. I think some of those demon eyes were taken from Naruto. Look here, the Sage mode down there looks like the Rinnegan. If you look closely, there's a Sharingan there. I don't know, man. I think there was some copying going on here. But the protagonist questions why he's doing something like this. But Beston says that he doesn't believe that's what he's really curious about. He says what he's curious about is why, among the countless alterations, the Tower of Nightmares was summoned to his world, and why he and his family were forced into such a fate. He says his world was chosen simply by chance, but the protagonist says that's enough, stating that what he's asking is why someone like him is operating the Tower of Nightmares. And Beston questions what he's talking about, and the protagonist asks what he gains from this kind of work. And so he starts bullshitting, unable to answer, saying that you could say it's a kind of volunteer work he does. But he starts to notice that the protagonist doesn't believe a single word he's saying, and that demons are quite fond of volunteering. There are many demons among them who help special wanderers on different planets, and there's a place called Paradise, where souls and demons below humans live together in peace. But above his head, a message from the monarch about the protagonist's cultivation appears before the protagonist's eyes. Then Beston asks if he finally believes him. The protagonist doesn't believe him one bit, because he knows too much. Then he starts to see his own information, realizing that his level is very high, and everything in his status is at the maximum level and has reached its limit. And so he thinks that now he has no abilities left to evolve, but he still can't hit him. Thinking about this, he gets a little discouraged and wonders if humans can really be reduced to nothing and maybe the system of that world is wrong. At that moment, he feels something and wonders what it was, because he's sure that was a very strange sensation. Realizing that it's something that shouldn't be there, he starts seeing several particles in the air and wonders if this is a hallucination. Then he catches one of those particles, which breaks into various specks of dust wandering through the air. And he says that these were fine particles, and then they took the shape of a sugar cube, and each time they changed, they took on a different form. These particles were the essence of this world, and no matter the form, he instinctively understood what it was. Here in the present, he's basically reading the malice that Beston is trying to pull on him about this so-called volunteer work. He asks about the monarch, asking if he is the king. And so Beston asks if he's finally sparked his interest, saying that the monarchs are the protectors of the Great Earth, and usually those who complete this game proceed to the Great Earth and will receive the monarch's support. But the protagonist questions this support, and Beston says that depending on the monarch he chooses, his future will also change. And if he follows what he's saying, he, Beston, will swear on his name and use all his powers to help him choose a great monarch. And of course, this only applies if he's willing to participate in the real game until the end. And the protagonist says he sounds like an insurance salesman and is acting like one. Beston is surprised, saying there's no fucking way he's acting like that. And the protagonist says he understands and that he'll do what he's saying, stating that in exactly 10 days, he will leave this place. And so, 9 days later, the protagonist continues to train, and Beston is watching him, noting that he's been doing that shit all day long. But he thinks it's okay, because he just needs to have a little more patience. They're almost done. He bought this stupid tower because he was tricked by those bastards, getting pissed that this is all the fault of those shitty scammers. And he says that they claimed the tower was personally built by a master, and that it was a first-generation antique whose age couldn't even be measured. He says that if it were a third-generation tower, there would be a function to force the end of the tutorial without damaging the prizes. But he can't end the game without making a deal for the rewards because of that damned first-generation tower. So he gets really pissed at the protagonist because of it, but says it's okay. Cursing. What can he do? Saying that being poor is a sin, he says he'll just use it since it works well, but he says that tomorrow will be the end. And the next day, the protagonist reads some messages. One of them talks about the final summary of the Great Earth, about increasing adaptation to become an adapter in a place he must visit, even if he has to die, the 12 zones of the Great Earth. And it teaches everything the protagonist needs to know. And a new message appears, saying that the Game Master wants to end the tutorial. He will return to World 294 without losing any of his memories, and will begin the real game. And so Beston asks if he has memorized all the information he gave him, and the protagonist says yes, thanking him. Then he tells him to hurry up and press the accept button, saying he's waited so long for this day that he's way too excited, but the protagonist attacks him, making him disappear. Then he speaks to Chung-Hoo, questioning what he's doing, because the protagonist is attacking him again. He says that he should know just by looking, because from now on, he is going to hunt him, and he attacks Beston once again. He says that after he was able to see the particles, the thrusting motion of his sword became unstable, and every time he thrusts, he gets a strange feeling of discomfort, and it's like an awakening of sensations. So he continues thrusting, killing Beston time after time, and he wonders if this is the feeling of being alive. But then he ends up getting caught by something, and Beston throws several tentacles on top of the boy, and that is the black iron tree, a plant from the 91st floor. And he says that he's never seen anyone like the protagonist before, and that it would have been easier for both of them if it had been like this from the beginning. He asks if the Jaehwan disagrees. So the Jaehwan asks what he's going to do, saying that he won't be able to end this game without his consent. And so, Beston says that's true. Honestly, he gave up on getting his consent a long time ago, and this time, he's going to ask him a question. Why does he think this tutorial never ends? He says that this Tower of Nightmares is programmed to automatically end 100 days after the tutorial is completed. The Jaehwan is startled, but Beston speaks to Chung-he, telling him he just needs to hold him down and make him quietly participate in the real game later. And so, the Jaehwan speaks to Beston, asking if, in the Great Land, he's known as the Temple of Provocation. And Beston is shocked by this. The Jaehwan says he's lived for 784 years so far and has been to a total of 128 worlds, and he continues to use his horrific cultivation on the target tribes. At this, Beston asks how he knows, and Chung-he says he was planning on handing him over to the Dark Monarch known as the Mathematician, and Beston gets scared to death, questioning who he is, since all that information is appearing above his head, and the Jaehwan finds it strange that he's asking who he is. After all, he's the prize he's been cultivating there for several years, but then he declares he won't be imprisoned anymore, breaking free from the plant Beston had used to trap him. As soon as the Jaehwan breaks free, he immediately lunges at Beston with a thrust, and Beston is terrified of the attack, as he's now starting to sweat. So he deflects the Jaehwan's attack, and things finally start to go south for him, as he's feeling the impact right where it hit his left shoulder. He starts screaming, thinking this can't be possible, wondering how the kid is doing this, as the attack begins to glow blue. Beston wonders if he's achieved hyper-adaptation, and the boy really has. And so, his sword evolves into a gigantic blade, and the Jaehwan reaches a whole new level. Then he says that after reaching the 100th floor, he had his doubts. He started to question if this was also part of the dream, and he doubted, wondering if this guy couldn't kill him, and he doubted again, questioning if being human meant he could be restored indefinitely like this, while the essence of the world was being destroyed. And so the conversation began, and that was the end of his countless doubts. He says he reached a place where there were no more doubts and achieved enlightenment, and after achieving enlightenment, he starts attacking Beston, who begins to defend himself as if his life depends on it because apparently, it does. He's terrified, so he yells to connect, and it's announced that the agreed-upon temporal restrictions have been removed, and he returns to his prime level form, telling the Jaehwan to surrender now. He starts slashing the boy to pieces. And Beston says that as incredible as he is for adapting to round 2 so quickly after the tutorial ended, this is the limit of how far humans can go, saying he can't defeat him, the great Beston. And so he starts launching spikes from the ground that shoot towards the Jaehwan and begin to impale the boy. But then the Jaehwan asks himself if this is how it's all going to end. He ends up gripping his sword even tighter as the numbers keep counting, and so he attacks again and again until he reaches 9,999,999,999. And so, Beston says that he'll have to participate in the real game one way or another, and by doing this to him, he's the one who's losing out. And with that, on his last attack, the Jaehwan reaches 10 billion thrusts, and then he starts to realize something, wondering if it's true. He then takes that same line and brings it to the enemy's weak point and questions what's happening, because he's coming apart as if he were a bug. And Beston is even more surprised, saying that this isn't just adaptation, and wondering how he reached this level. And the Jaehwan's attack reaches him, tearing through and managing to land a hit. And after the attack connects, Beston falls to the ground, completely wrecked and defeated, and the Jaehwan tells him to listen one last time. This is while Beston thinks that what he experienced was an awakening. And the Jaehwan then says that humans are not things he can treat like merchandise, saying they aren't mere stepping stones for him to use as he pleases. And Beston has been reduced to a tiny kitten. Or at least an ugly little thing, right? The poor little guy is pathetic. Then the Jaehwan says they are not products he can put a price on, and he will no longer follow their plans, saying he's going to destroy this place and go up to the next floor. He starts looking at the already cracked ceiling and says he'll keep going further and further to destroy this damn world they created. And now his user information is completely erased, and everything is an unknown. Then Beston begs him to please stop, pleading with the Jaehwan because he's completely breaking the tower. And he says there's no such thing as a next floor, but the Jaehwan disagrees with him, saying that the next floor does exist. Then Beston gets even more scared, and the Jaehwan says they wouldn't have called him there for nothing. And he remembers the 78th floor, the 66th floor, and says that the writings of a certain artist's anguish are all over that place, even on the 47th. He says that in the end, the entire Tower of Nightmares is just an imitation of the first demon at the top of the Tree of Illusion, and he says this could be found in different parts of the tower. And he thinks about the top of the Tree of Illusion and says he's sure that these are the writings of Molar, the creator of the Tower of Nightmares. And he remembers what the system has already told him, asking Beston if his place is the root of the Tree of Illusion. Then Beston questions what he intends to do. And the Jaehwan says that if this place is the root, he's sure there's a trunk. So if he breaks the ceiling, he'll get there, and he unleashes a thrust with absurd power upwards. And Beston screams in desperation, telling him not to do that to his tower. Then, the Jaehwan thinks that he's finally found what he was looking for, appearing in another place. a forest, saying that he's finally found it. Dude, 10 billion thrusts! The guy humiliated the demon, broke the tower, and now he's just landed in the realm of the gods. If this isn't getting good, I must be crazy. Smash that like button, and let's get on with the video. As soon as the Jaehwan arrives in that world, several wolves begin to surround him. He's already in a pretty bad situation when the wolves lunge at him. He kills the first one with a light thrust, splitting the monster in half, and the others continue to attack. And this time, an even bigger wolf appears, a gigantic one, and the Jaehwan says that a light thrust won't be enough for that guy. And so he uses a normal thrust, opening a huge hole in the middle of that thing's chest. My friend, he's the one-punch man of thrusting, the thrust man. After killing that thing, he rips off its horn and takes it with him. And he says that all the monsters there seem weak. My friend, I think you're mistaken. Maybe you did Saitama's training and lost touch with reality a bit. And then he hears someone talking to him. And when he looks back, he sees a bunch of little green men, and apparently he's ended up on Mars. And they start shouting, saying, "Horn of whatever." And the Jaehwan thinks that even with his skill active, he can't easily decipher the structure of their language. He asks about the horn, asking if they want it, saying it's all good, they'll make a trade. He'll give it to them if they tell him what this place is. But then one of those men lunges at him, trying to strike him. However, the Jaehwan speaks to the one with the little antenna, saying that if he does that one more time, he'll kill all of them. And so he really does draw his sword and ends up killing everyone, asking the last one who's still barely alive to answer him, but he can't understand a thing. However, Chung-he pulls the creature's antenna, making it start cursing him out, completely pissed off. And the Jaehwan tells him to speak in a way he can understand, but the monster says it will kill the human and ends up biting its own tongue to kill itself. He says he thought they were the weaklings, but one of them had surprising willpower. He looks at their antennae, sets them on the ground, and buries them out of respect. He says he managed to get zero information and wonders if there are at least some items. He ends up finding a small dimensional pouch among the men's belongings and realizes it's an item that works as an inventory, thinking it's perfect. After all, he hasn't been able to use the system interface since he left the Tower of Nightmares. He says he thought he'd be able to use this stuff in every dimension, including the Great Land, as he thinks about that damned lion. But he's glad he can at least see information using his appraisal skill. That's a spectrum crystal, which increases one's strength and spiritual power by a set amount. And he notices they're different colors, but each of them was holding at least one. He wonders if they were jewelers or something. Either way, this will be very valuable to him. He thinks he'll have to leave the rest of the things behind because they're too bulky. But then his dagger trembles once more and starts devouring them. The protagonist is quite surprised, thinking there's still other stuff left, and notices there's a map of the Mirage Tree in Chaos. He notes that it's a place that wasn't in the information that damned demon gave him, so he continues on through the forest. But in another corner of it, a group with a very flashy redhead is fighting some wolves. But then the redhead notices something, throws her dagger to the side, and ends up hitting a guy with red dreadlocks. She starts apologizing, but he says it's fine and she claims it was an accident. She says she meant to throw it in the other direction and that she'd better go hunt over there. And he thinks, does she get a pass just because she's cute? I think this is a new level of simp, the kind that's okay with getting stabbed. And just like that, the same girl continues hunting and starts apologizing again. And everyone wonders why she's saying sorry now, since she's dragging a massive monster toward them. They notice it's the two-horned beast. They're shocked that the girl messed with the two-horned beast, telling her not to come their way, but she just runs over to them, acting all cute. So everyone yells to group up quickly to face that thing. And the protagonist watches them from above, noting that the girl seems to be the strongest in the group, and wonders if they're even friends. At this rate, they're all going to die. He wonders how they managed to get through the Tower of Nightmares being so weak. But just then, the guy with the dreads appears to save the day, telling the beast to bring it on while using the breath of the Flame King. And then someone says they'll help him too, but the girl is more of a hindrance than a help, and he gets really pissed. She starts saying it was her bad, but I think he's realizing that maybe it wasn't an accident. He curses the woman out, but she doesn't like that much, saying he was too harsh since she was just trying to help, but he obviously doesn't believe her. But his friends call out to him, warning him about the thing in front of him. However, the protagonist acts quickly before the guy with the dreads can be killed, lunging forward with a light thrust at the monster and killing it in a single blow. The monster's blood rains down all over the guy with the dreads, and the protagonist slams his gigantic sword into the ground. And when the dust settles, everyone sees the badass standing on top of the creature's corpse, and they start to wonder who he is. A while later, after they start to sort things out, they ask if he's really sure, wondering if it's okay for their group to keep the corpse of the two-horned beast. After all, it's the two-horned beast they're talking about. And the protagonist says yes, but they ask if the horn is really that valuable or something. One of them says of course it is, since a two-horned beast requires at least 10 people to kill. and the protagonist thinks to himself that the one he killed earlier with a normal thrust had 5 horns. He believes that the more horns they have, the stronger they are, and that girl who was obviously sabotaging their plan gets more and more apprehensive. So, she tries to approach the protagonist, asking who he is, saying there are no adapted in all of Chaos who can kill a 2-horned beast with a simple thrust, and demands to know where he came from. But the protagonist, looking right at her, ignores every single question the girl asked and simply asks, "What is this? Chaos?" And the girl looks at him as if he'd said something absurd, asking what he means. After that, they start talking more, and they're surprised when the protagonist says he's just passing through. On top of that, he also said he doesn't know the language of this place, and they all find it strange, because language barriers are rare here. While they're talking, the redhead keeps thinking about the protagonist, because this self-proclaimed passerby killed the 2-horned beast without using any skills. In fact, he just thrusted once, and so she tries to use one of her skills on him, but it fails every time she tries. And she says that her detection skill isn't working and her appraisal is coming up as impossible. She thinks that even if his spiritual power is that of an adapted, she wonders who the hell he is. And so she says she has a question, stating there are very few adapted in Chaos who can kill a 2-horned beast with just one thrust, and tells him to tell her his true identity. And so he once again asks what Chaos is. The girl asks if he's messing with her, but he says he's not. So she asks why he's talking like that, and once again, he doesn't understand her. And she asks if he didn't understand what she said. She wonders if identity was too difficult a word, but the protagonist tells her he knows what identity means. It's just that, as he remembers everything he's been through, he thinks to himself that the relationships he had on Earth have lost all meaning. It happened as soon as he entered the tower. He remembers each and every one of his companions, and he thinks that in this place, he made new companions and memories. However, they disappeared like a mirage at the end of the tutorial, and his companions are probably alive somewhere on Earth now. But if the reward for completion was to start over with memories intact, they probably don't remember him or what happened inside the tower. And he says, "I don't remember my identity." And the girl says she gets it now, saying it must be amnesia, but then asks if he really thought she'd fall for that, because saying you have amnesia with such a serious tone won't work. But the protagonist says he never said he had amnesia, and the girl calls him an idiot, asking if he's the strong man from the abyss or something. And the protagonist says that's enough, telling her to stop bothering him as he grabs his weapon. It grows instantly, and the girl is shocked. He has a spirit weapon, and the weapon starts eating the items in his bag. She starts to think that wasn't his own strength, but the weapons, saying that showing off a spirit weapon so brazenly in front of others is something you just don't do. And all 3 of them keep their eyes on the weapon, noticing that it seems to be a spirit weapon and that he's feeding it other equipment. And they think the protagonist is full of openings, but in reality, he just wants the weapon to go back to normal quickly. And the girl says she can't believe a guy like him ruined her mission, saying she could have easily finished off that guy with the dreads. But then, an idea pops into her head and she tells the protagonist that it's fine, saying she won't ask about his identity anymore. In fact, she has a proposal to make and asks if he wants to hear it. And so the protagonist says that this woman, who had introduced herself as Minora, gave him a brief explanation of Chaos. Then she talked about her companions and said that those guys are shameless bastards who are part of a clan called the Red Fox. And the protagonist says that, in short, she wants him to kill these guys. She says he'll find out soon enough. They'll definitely come after him, and she tells him not to stare. And during the night, the guy with the dreads says that since it's dark, they should make camp there, because walking in the dark is dangerous, and they might end up accidentally provoking a horned beast. So they all stop around the campfire to rest, and the Jaehwan lies down a little ways away, thinking that, looking at the map, the village was pretty close. He starts looking at those lights again, and thinks about the second stage of awakening understanding. Just then, he hears everyone talking and whispering near him, and one of them tells the captain that his spiritual power is the same as an unadapted person's, and even less than his own. So they're surprised, since they had all noticed it, and start to think they only managed to kill the 2-horned beast thanks to the spiritual weapon. And one of them concludes, that's right, saying that, from what he knows, spiritual weapons are artifacts you can only get in the abyss. They question if they're talking about Times Abyss, the branch of the Mirage tree. The Jaehwan realizes they're planning something. They'll be shocked if they find out he bought it from the root. And he thinks that, according to that demon, the equipment from the tower was supposed to be just mediocre. He can't even believe people are after it, but thinks that, either way, it seems this isn't the Great Land. And just then, a commotion starts in the forest. The Jaehwan notices they've started to move. So the redhead runs up to him, asking what he's doing, because they're coming. She says he has that sword that ate the equipment before, telling him to defeat them with it. But the Jaehwan says no, he lent it out. They said they wanted to take a look while they stood guard. The girl is shocked that he lent a spiritual weapon for such a crappy reason, saying there should be a limit to his stupidity in the face of danger. Then the guy with the dreadlocks calls the Jaehwan an idiot while laughing, saying he'll make good use of his weapon. But with the red fox there, it wouldn't make a difference even if he had his weapon. And the others start to complain because he called everyone over for just 2 people, telling them to get it over with and leave. Then, the redhead asks them if they really want to spill blood. The Jaehwan thinks to himself, happy that he'll finally be able to see the woman's true abilities, since she's ready to defend him. And at that, the guy with the dreadlocks orders all his henchmen to kill the 2 of them. They really charge in, but the girl takes out some kunai and hits them right between the eyes, killing 2, and she takes down the 3rd one with a kick. The Jaehwan is watching from the side as the girl says, "My bad, I think I threw them a little too hard," and now she declares that she's pissed off. From this moment on, they're going to go through a truly horrible experience. The guy with the dreadlocks says he had a feeling when she betrayed the monsters for them, asking if she really is the witch of the massacre. The girl is ready to unleash a massacre on them, and he asks who put in a request with the Shadow Warriors. But the girl questions what that matters and says they've killed so many clueless, unadapted people. She's sure there are plenty of people in the chaos who want them dead. As she attacks, he dodges all the daggers and says there's no way the Shadow Warriors would decide to act for such pathetic guys. Then he starts breaking those daggers using the Jaehwan's weapon and says she must have gotten a private request, and in that case, she's going to die right there. But the witch questions if he wants to face her while relying on a spiritual weapon. He says he took other precautions, and the girl sees they are at least first stage adapted. They're all staring at her with an insane bloodlust, and she realizes there must be about 30 or even 40 of them. So she says she thought she'd felt the presence of several others, and he asks if she thought he would have gotten into a fight without preparing, especially against a witch from the Shadow Warriors and a guy who killed a 2-horned beast with a single blow. And he says that if he knew he'd get the spiritual weapon this easily, he wouldn't have gone so far as to call the master. That master is a guy with the face of an absolute psycho. The witch is surprised that the Black Fox is there too, saying that not much must be happening lately. The Black Fox tells her to consider it an honor. He is the master of the Red Fox clan, a 3rd stage adapted. He says that more than half of the Red Fox clan has gathered to hunt her, so she says it's quite an honor and, since they have so much free time, asks them to wait just a second. She thinks that she's not sure if she can beat him one-on-one, since he's a 3rd stage adapted. So the girl calls the Jaehwan and says she's very sorry, but she won't be able to protect him. Then she tells him to take this and run. The Jaehwan sees it's a nightmare stone and asks what it is. She says it's a return stone, and when he uses it, he can escape to the nearest castle. She says that since this is the only one she has, he can use it. Then the Jaehwan thinks that it's not a stone to go back to the past, but a stone that can save someone in the present. He wonders what would have happened if, back then, instead of a useless stone, he could have given one of these to Aruna. And he asks the witch one thing: if she could go back to the past, would she? But she asks if he really has to ask a question like that now, and what kind of weirdo he is. She says of course not. She did her best in her life, and if she has to die, she'll die today, because she would never go back to the past. Just then, the Jaehwan touches her shoulder, saying she won't die today. He pulls out another weapon, and the girl is shocked. He charges at them, and the slaughter begins. The Black Fox yells for them to form the 14th formation of the Flame King. Several of them use fire attacks to try and hit the Jaehwan, and so he uses the Lost Enchantment, passing through the middle of them all with his thrust, piercing each one of them. The Black Fox manages to stop part of the Jaehwan's attack, but takes a serious hit, and the Jaehwan manages to pierce his chest with everything he has. Then his blood splatters on the face of the dreadlock psycho, and he drops dead right there. The Jaehwan is tranquil and calm. Thus, the last one left is the one with his spiritual weapon, who hands it over to the Jaehwan as if he were a servant serving his master. After taking the weapon, he prepares to kill everyone who's left, using the light thrust and finishing them all off at once. The girl questions, "What the hell is that? How can a thrust be like that?" She says she thought he was an idiot full of openings, so she assumed he was a clueless fool with no sense of danger. But that wasn't the case. He's just really strong. So she calls to him, asking what his true identity is. And the Jaehwan asks if she's already forgotten, because she already knows his identity. She doesn't really understand. And so he asks if she's suffering from memory loss, because he thought he was the only one. She notices he's messing with her and tells him to give back the return stone she gave him. But he says he doesn't have it, that he lost it, and she questions how he could lose such an expensive item like that. Then the 2 of them stop around the campfire once more. He thinks that it's somehow peaceful here, but she keeps rummaging through her things, saying the stone isn't there. She asks if he's serious, wondering why she has to go through all this for a stranger. And the Jaehwan continues to feed that hungry sword of his on the side. The Jaehwan says she should already know. She asks what he's talking about, and he says she should know his identity, a human. Then she asks if he's kidding and asks if she's human. She answers, of course, that she's almost human, and the Jaehwan says that's good. Then she questions what that expression on his face is. Is that it? Is it enough that they're both human? The next day, they continue walking, and the girl asks if he really has no memories of entering the chaos or of the great land. He says something like that, and the girl says she's jealous of him for not having those memories. Model. But he questions if amnesia is really something to be envious about. She says she's sure most of the people there are jealous of him because it's obvious how everyone wound up in chaos. So he asks her, if it's so obvious, how did she end up here? But at that, she stops and gets serious with him, saying that when he finds out the answer to what he just asked, she's sure he will regret it deeply. They then walk until they reach Gorgon's castle, and at the entrance, she says they've finally reached a city. The protagonist notices that the thing on the side looks like the kind of summoning arena that was on the first floor of the tutorial. And just then, he sees someone being summoned, remarking that he's very familiar with this. Just then, several people appear there completely naked, and some of them are screaming, crying, and totally lost. And the protagonist says he's familiar with people making expressions just like theirs. And the witch says that a whole bunch of them came this time too. Then she asks if he understood what she told him before. Because asking how someone ended up in chaos is something you should never, ever do to anyone here. Everyone arrives here after suffering immensely, and she tells him that this is the world of the dead, chaos. So the protagonist asks if people come to chaos when they die on the great land. And she says that's exactly right, explaining that dying here means the end, and when someone dies, they become nutrients for the mirage tree. And since they've died before, they won't even shed red blood. Just then, a squad arrives, and their leader orders them to line up and take everyone to the auditorium, telling all the naked people there to put those on and get in line. And he tells one of the boys that he must have died for being a good-for-nothing, telling him to fix his posture and asking if he was a Webtoon artist or something. But then the witch calls out to James, and he's surprised, especially that she came all the way to the checkpoint, and she says she just happened to be passing by, since it's not like they're strangers. So she wishes he'd just let her in already, but he apologizes. And she's totally shocked by what Tion is saying about that outdated certificate handed out by the big brother. So she asks, why now of all times? After all, the protagonist obviously doesn't have a certificate either. Then, she gets an idea. She tells James she's so sorry, but she must have left her certificate behind, and wonders if he could maybe let her slide just this once. And he's surprised to see it's a horn from a two-horned beast. So he says he's checked her certificate, adding that it's not like they're strangers anyway. Everyone there watches him get bribed right out in the open, while the girl is all smiles. But then, James turns to the protagonist, saying he needs to show his certificate too. He says he doesn't have anything like that, and asks if he really needs one. The girl chimes in that he looks like he's in trouble, saying that if he asks her nicely, she might be able to help him out. James says that if he doesn't have a certificate, he can't enter the castle. The protagonist says he gets it, but then he reaches for his waist. The girl asks what he's doing, wondering if he's actually planning to kill the guards just to get inside. No freaking way. I mean, even if he's a total psycho, who would even think of doing something like that? Then she remembers he'd take down James in a single move, and after finishing them all off, he'd just casually ask if she was coming in or not. And she thinks he could actually pull it off. So she tells James to wait, saying this guy's actually with her. But then someone else shows up, asking what's going on here. They both look back, a little scared, and she thinks, oh, crap, he's here. And just like that, all the other soldiers snap into formation. She says he's a celebrity at Gorgon Castle, the least corrupt officer in all this chaos, the officer of the northern checkpoint, Bullhead Calton. So he asks James what the hell is going on. He quickly gets the rundown and realizes the guy wants to get into the castle but doesn't have a certificate. He says they can't let that happen, and our guy asks, why? Calton retorts, asking if he really wants to know, explaining that when someone is unable to prove their identity with a certificate, a checkpoint official can use their authority to deny a traveler entry. He says it like it's a royal decree, stating that it's explicitly written in Gorgon's entry law, Article 27, Paragraph 4. Everyone there complies, since they have some kind of shackle-like collar on them, and she notes that he was compelled to use his decree ability, realizing things just got a whole lot more complicated. And he adds that in such cases, Gorgon's imprisonment law also applies, but the protagonist just jabs at the decree, freeing the girl from its hold. He tells the officer to cut it out, saying he couldn't care less about what the law says. Calton is completely stunned by what the protagonist just did. Then, the protagonist asks what a certificate even says. At this, Calton demands to know how he just snapped out of his decree's effect. He explains that a certificate indicates your true name, your allied organization, information on your primary class and skills, partial status data, criminal record, spiritual corruption, all of it. So the protagonist just says, looks like I don't need one of those then. I'm not getting one. But Carlton is still trying to figure out why his decree has no effect on the guy. So he announces, in accordance with Gorgon's imprisonment law, Article 2, Paragraph 7, I will now place you under arrest using silver prison. And these chains shoot towards the protagonist, who just stands there watching. When the chains reach him, he shatters them effortlessly. They don't even manage to wrap around him. Everyone is shocked that he broke Carlton's chains, and Carlton himself is wondering how the hell this kid is doing it. But then the protagonist asks, don't I just have to do what she did? Mino is confused about what he means, then remembers giving the horn as a bribe to get in. The guard who took the bribe and the ones who covered for him are scared shitless. Just then, the protagonist tries to toss a horn into Carlton's hand. The girl yells for him to wait. When Carlton catches it, the protagonist says, just take this and let me in. James is freaking out now, screaming about how he dares to bribe an officer. He asks if he thinks he owns the place, telling Carlton that the guy deserves to be executed on the spot. But Carlton just asks, did you say your name is Chung-He? The protagonist confirms, and Carlton says, I've been waiting for you. You're the envoy from the Green Pier clan. With that, Carlton starts taking a reading on Mino. The device he's using identifies that the girl's spiritual corruption has exceeded 15%, and it recommends she get medicated as soon as possible. Carlton tells her that her spirit is corrupted, saying he doesn't need to tell her what to do. She says she gets it. But the protagonist doesn't understand this spiritual corruption stuff, and she realizes he really is clueless as she nibbles on something to medicate herself. She says she's amazed she even managed to travel with him this far, and then starts explaining spiritual corruption, that it's a chronic illness everyone who lives in the chaos gets. Your spirit gets slowly corrupted just by existing here. And once the corruption maxes out, you literally just drop dead. She says that's why beast horns are so valuable. She tells him he must have seen how fascinated that other guard was by the horn. She explains that the horns are the only medicinal ingredient that can relieve the spiritual corruption from the chaos. It's a must-have item for anyone living here. She adds that she managed to get a few, thanks to a certain someone along the way. Then, Carlton says he's going to assess him using the magic eye on his hand. When he activates the device and points it at the protagonist, it shows an error message, unable to measure spiritual corruption level. And looking at that screen, James is completely shocked, because his corruption level is 0%. Catan looks at the protagonist's hand and says he gets it, telling him he'll return those scepter crystals now that the verification is over, and the protagonist notices that he doesn't need them. He says that scepter crystals aren't something you can just hand over to someone else, calling him an envoy from the Green Pier clan. But the protagonist says he's not an envoy or anything of the sort, but Satan just smiles, saying he knows that. Then, as he's leaving, James speaks to him, asking if it's really okay to just let them go like that. And Sidon talks to James, asking him if he knows what kind of object the scepter crystal is. He asks if it isn't a valuable item, capable of amplifying an adept's spiritual power. And James says that's correct, but that's not all it does. Taking off his glove, he shows his hand to James, who is horrified to see that his hand is all burnt. Then he asks if it was because of the crystal, and Seaton says that unless you're from the Green Pier clan, it's impossible to handle scepter crystals. They are the only ones who can carry these crystals and avoid corruption. So, even though the protagonist doesn't seem to be part of the Green Pier clan, Khan witnessed him holding the crystal. But then, James asks how he can trust him, but Seaton says he doesn't. However, he trusts his spirit, and James has no idea what he's talking about. And Seaton asks if he remembers how they evaluated the protagonist's spiritual corruption level. James says yes, saying it gave an error, but Seaton says that, as far as he knows, the measuring equipment never makes mistakes. And so, James asks what that was. Then, and he says there's only one scenario where the device can't measure spiritual corruption, which is that his spirit is purer than anyone else's in chaos. So, James asks how that's possible, and Seaton says it doesn't really matter if he's a Green Pier or not. They simply need someone who can use the crystals, and those inside the castle will judge him now. James asks if this has to do with the castle's condition, but Seaton says he doesn't know the exact details either. However, he brings something else up to James, because from what he heard, there was someone who let a person pass after being bribed, and he thinks his name was also James. And he gets scared shitless, seeing that he's been found out. And with that, the protagonist starts thinking to himself, noticing that these roads are way too complicated. And now he also has a dead weight holding him back, since the girl is being completely useless. He wonders who's guiding who. He remembers that the girl got a huge lecture and ended up getting all dazed, just following him. Seaton tells the protagonist that she'll be fine in a bit and tells them to enjoy their stay at Gorgon Castle. He's surprised, because it's crazy to think the effects of the decree last this long, since she seems like a real handful. And so, he speaks to someone nearby, saying he's looking for a blacksmith who specializes in swords. Another guy looks up from below, paying attention to what the protagonist is saying, and he asks if there's any blacksmith capable of handling a sword of that level, once again showing off his sword in public. The man says he's not sure, and the guy down below apparently already wants to rob the protagonist. After a while, the girl comes to her senses. She asks when they entered the village, and he's surprised that she's finally snapped out of it, telling her she can go her own way. Then she asks what he's talking about, telling him to wait. She asks if he isn't being too harsh, just tossing her aside like that, and also if he's still mad because she tried to ditch him at the castle entrance, saying it was just a joke. However, the protagonist says that she guided him to the castle, and that's enough. From here on out, she'll just get in his way. And he looks back very seriously, saying that the two of them are different. Yeah, guys, I don't know if you got it, but he can see her true essence. And like, in this world, she's the one on the left. I think it'll be on the left for you. She's the real person, but he can see her true form because she's a dead person. So, to him, she's just a corpse. And he tells her it's better if she leaves now. The girl is speechless, but apparently, she's going to talk anyway, asking him to wait and saying he doesn't even know his way around here. And what kind of trouble does he plan on causing all by himself? He says he can just ask the people around. But then she tells him to ask her, saying she knows this place like the back of her hand. He gives in, saying he needs to find a blacksmith, and she says she has an idea where there might be one, asking if he wants her to take him there, and he agrees. But before that, he says it looks like some guys have business to settle with him, and everyone shows up wanting to rob the protagonist. One of them asks if they're the ones with the good sword, because he said it was a flaming sword, and the other one immediately calls him a liar. It's a lie. The information was wrong. The girl asks who they are, telling them to get lost if they don't want to get hurt. Then they talk to the little redhead, saying she has a sharp tongue and that she'd better watch her mouth. One of them, who looks like a bull, says it's because his younger brother gets excited when he hears cuss words, saying he's only 12 years old. You've got to be kidding. No way. This dude looks like he's been retired for 12 years, and he says that cussing is bad for a child's development. And one of them says that if they don't want to get trampled by his brother, they'd better hand over the blue sword. However, the protagonist simply says no. The girl keeps questioning if he's really the younger one. Then, one of them asks what she's talking about, asking if they understand the situation they've gotten themselves into, and saying that if they don't want to get hurt, they should hand over the sword right now. But the girl keeps asking how he could be the younger one, telling them to stop lying. I'm with her on this one, you know? Look at the size of this monster. How is this thing 12 years old, man? No way, not even in cat years. And with that, the huge monster actually lunges at her, saying he's going to punish her for the cuss words. But before he can do anything, the protagonist rips off both his arms, stunting the 12-year-old's growth. He unleashes an insane attack on the other three, destroying the house that was behind them. Then, that guy collapses on the ground, and the protagonist says they're too noisy, pointing his sword at them. He says that if they want to fight, they can come at him. One of them freaks out, asking how he dares cut off his younger brother's precious hands, and saying they'll never forgive him. But they take off running, while he yells that they'll pay the price for killing his adorable younger brother. However, one of them says that his brother isn't dead yet, and the two of them just stand there watching the scene, which looks like something out of a comedy. And the three who are left charge at the protagonist, saying they're going to show them the bond between brothers. But the protagonist just raises his sword. And after that whole discussion, the protagonist is wiping that super weird goo they use for blood in this place off his sword. The girl says it's incredible, asking how he settled everything with just one thrust, and how strong his other skills are. But the protagonist says he only knows how to thrust, and the girl questions if he's joking. He tells her he only uses light thrust, medium thrust, and heavy thrust, along with the serious thrust and some other thrust combos. Kinda like Saitama, right? I mean, I'm not trying to say anything, but it sure looks like it. And she asks if he's serious, and says she just remembered someone who also only uses one technique like him. That person uses slashes, not thrusts. He asks if the person only uses slashes, because using just one technique is pretty weird. But she asks why his attack from before missed, and he doesn't really understand what she means. She asks why he blew up the ceiling above them, wondering if he slipped while adjusting his strength. And he says it's because while they were facing those bandits, there was someone using an invisibility skill on the other side that was bothering him, so he decided to scare them. She then asks who the hell scares someone by blowing up a roof. He says everyone does it, because Chung-ho would have done it too. But then the girl starts saying they need to think of a cool name for his technique. He doesn't really get it. She says something like the Darkness Destroying Piercer or Asura's Infinite Strike, but he says he doesn't like weird names. And she asks, how about the Sky Shattering Isolator Attack or even the Comet Rush? And he just tells her to keep walking and shut up. And so, he arrived at another place. She says she found the Twilight Workshop there, saying that it's a workshop founded by a nightmare and also the biggest workshop in Gorgon. And then, someone from inside asks if they're customers who've come to place an order, and the guy says he's very sorry, but if they place an order today, it'll take a while to be delivered. And that's the head artisan of the Twilight Workshop. The girl asks if the reservations are full, and he says the workshop manager is away right now, and the only one there is the assistant manager. But he's busy today too, since he said he's testing the artisans or something. And so he says that if they're looking for something, it might be better to buy something ready-made than to commission an item. And so they look at the manager along with the other artisans, and he says that right there is a sword made from the horn of a four-horned beast. It'll be complete as soon as they make a hole in the hilt to set a gem. And everyone says they want to do it, saying they want to try refining a horn from a four-horned beast too. But he says that this is a horn from a four-horned beast, asking if they really want to drill a hole in that thing. And Michael just says he likes their energy. And if anyone manages to drill a hole in that sword, no matter who it is, he'll give that person the position of assistant manager of the Twilight Workshop for the rest of the day. And everyone wonders why this thing is so tough as they start trying. And they all try to do something, but end up with broken tools and hammers. And they wonder how Rise managed to refine that thing. And Michael notices that, by hitting it like that, they won't even be able to make a scratch. He even gave them the opportunity to use his huge workshop all day, and they can't even do this. And Nav, over by the door, gets jealous, wondering when he'll get a chance to touch the horn of a four-horned beast. But then the main character enters the place, and he tries to stop the kid, asking him to wait because he can't go in there right now. And Mikkel, looking at him, is doubtful, and the main character asks to try too. And so Mikkel is surprised, thinking he's a traveling artisan, figuring he wants to try because it's the horn of a four-horned beast. He says he doesn't know what workshop he's from, but wishes him good luck, telling him not to think it'll be easy after his apprentices couldn't do it. And the main character asks if the hole should go about there, asking if that's good. He says it's not that the apprentices are bad, it's just that he's excellent. And the horn of a four-horned beast is an incredibly difficult material to handle, and it's natural for them to fail. But the main character just goes to touch that thing with a single finger, causing such a huge impact that Mikkel is left speechless, completely surprised. And so the main character actually drills a hole in that thing and starts swinging the sword with just his hand, saying he's done, and asks if he can be the assistant manager for the rest of the day. Everyone is shocked, but it turns out that as he's spinning it, the sword simply shatters completely, turning to dust in front of them. And so the main character is surprised that it broke, saying it with absurd nonchalance. But then Mikkel starts cursing him out, not believing he's acting so casual, saying he should break his head, asking if he knows how expensive that horn is. But the main character says he went easy on it. And Mino asks, "What do you mean?" He went easy on it. And the main character says that breaking something completely is easy, but breaking it just a little is hard. In any case, he's very sorry. And at that, Mikkel asks if he thinks an apology is enough, saying this was the horn of a four-horned beast worth a fortune, and asking what they're going to tell the Primordial Universe sect who commissioned it. So the main character says he'll pay him back with an even better horn. He asks what he means by pay him back, wondering how the hell a damn kid like him could possibly pay him back with something better than a horn of that quality. And the main character takes something out of his bag, saying he'll pay him back with this, adding that it's from a five-horned creature, and that it's better. Everyone is shocked, because it's from a five-horned beast, the horn of a Garnak. And he asks if he can accept it, saying he doesn't have the horn of a four-horned beast or whatever. And Michael's attitude changes on the spot, saying, of course he can accept it, even calling him dear customer. The main character says that's a relief, and then asks if he can use his workshop for a bit. And Michael then tells them to close the doors, and everyone agrees. And he asks the kid to come with him quickly, and Mino says it looks like things worked out, so he should do what he needs to do, because she has to go somewhere else real quick. And so, when the doors close, Michael says that this is his workshop, and it's the best in all of Gorgon. And since he's the assistant manager for the day, he can use all the facilities and people there as he wishes. The main character just thanks him, but then Michael asks how he managed to get the Garnak horn, and he says he got it himself. And Michael questions if he's saying he hunted a five-horned beast by himself. And the main character says yes, that he fought the thing, but Michael doesn't believe a guy can hunt a five-horned beast alone. So the main character asks for his help, and at that, Michael keeps thinking that it's rare to find people like this in Gorgon, maybe even in all of Chaos. But the main character tells him he needs a sheath, but he's never made one himself and only just realized it now. At that, he asks about a sheath, wondering if he's planning to use the Garnak horn to create a sheath. And he wonders how great this sword must be. And the main character shows him his blade, and he thinks it's a replica of an ice dragon sword, saying it's rare since it was made by a nightmare, and also very beautiful. But he thinks the Garnak horn is overkill for that, saying he thinks it would be better to make a new sword with this thing. And the sword starts to tremble, but then it trembles with hunger, leaving Mikkel's hand and going after the horn to eat it. He's shocked, because to think it would be a spirit weapon is just too much. And he says that from the spiritual energy he can feel, the soul of an elite race seems to be contained within the spirit, wondering how that could have happened. And he starts to notice that the main character's sword is evolving, and seeing how the shape is changing, it must be a major evolution, and when it's complete, he'll have to give the weapon a new name. And the main character is confused about that. He says that's right, because when a spirit weapon undergoes a major evolution, it loses its original name. But the problem is that he's lost the materials now. But the main character says it's okay because he has another horn. So, Mikkel wonders how this is happening, but then he remembers since he said it's a 5-horned beast. Then it has 5 horns. So he goes back to asking the main character how he can help him. He says that first, he should show him how he refines things, and so he says that's fine, asking if there's any shape he desires. He says he'll leave that choice in his hands, since he's the expert. And Michael gets all flustered, because that's too much responsibility, and says he'll have to show his skills as the master artisan of the dawn. Meanwhile, at Gorgon Castle, in the commander's room, he is sipping tea, listening to his spy's report. So he asks the commander for forgiveness, saying that they know the thieves were massacred by him, but they lost their target. And the commander asks how they were defeated, and so he says he's not sure either, because before he knew it, he was passed out on the roof. But Euroren is surprised he wasn't caught, since he saw through the invisibility skills of a master-level, 3rd stage adapted one. So he says this probably means he's at least a 5th stage adapted one. So he orders them to send more men to find him and to check every single corner of the castle. And so that man agrees. And as he leaves, the commander stays behind and starts looking at both his tea and his body. Then he asks his body to hold on just a little longer. Elsewhere, in a tavern, a girl starts talking on Siren's Top 10 weekly broadcast. As the last clip, she talks about one they're all very familiar with, the most famous clip on Little Brother, right? The most talked about clip is the solo completion of the 99th floor, and they are literally watching everything the protagonist did while fighting that ice dragon. They wonder what happened to that guy and bet he's wanted by all the monarchs. But one of the group asks what they're talking about and if they haven't heard that the tower was suspended. One of them asks why. And he says he bets some damn demon got caught cheating. They say he ran away and abandoned his cultivation duty, and he bets that clip is fake too. And one of them agrees. After all, how could anyone clear a 1st-generation tower alone? However, they remember that most demons can only afford a tower with a loan, and breaking something like that is totally insane. And he says that if he were in his shoes, he'd put it up for sale on the marketplace or something. And one of them asks the owner for another horn of beer, until the door opens. The one who enters is Mino, and she walks into the place while everyone drools over her. She goes to the counter and sits down. As soon as she stops, he says it's okay, telling her she shouldn't do something she'd regret. And then she starts wondering why she feels so shitty, saying she wants enough booze to kill her. After chugging it all, she says she can't believe it, because that bastard has no scruples whatsoever, asking why he thinks he's like that and questioning what he knows after everything. Then the bar owner, Claire, says she's said too much, telling her to stop, saying she can't even get drunk, and to stop acting like it. And if he's such a bastard, then why? But she remembers the moment the Prota gave a little smirk, thinking that he keeps saying weird things, and she remembers when she told him that he doesn't hesitate to use his strength when he doesn't even know what kind of place chaos is. But he simply answered her that they aren't even human, and she remembers how he looked at her when he said the two of them are different. And because of that, right now, she's feeling pretty down. She says he made her feel like she was nothing, and says that Claire, herself, and everyone who lives there has a hard life. But then he shows up out of nowhere and starts talking shit. She remembers when she asked him why he was looking for a nightmare, and he says she wouldn't understand even if he told her. And Mino starts complaining that he looks at her with that "we're different" face, and whenever she sees it, she gets pissed. But Claire caresses the girl, saying she's a very immature girl, telling her not to get involved with this anymore, asking her not to get near him again. But then she gets that look on her face, like she wants to. However, Claire says that if she gets with that guy, she could actually die. So she asks why Claire is acting so scary, wondering why she would die. But just then, a golden ray enters the place, shooting in front of her, and a golden bird with a kind of helmet on its head delivers a letter to her. And that letter is from Carlton Xavier, the head of the Northport, to Mino of the Shadow Warriors. She's surprised that Carlton is sending her a letter, wondering why he sent it. Then she thinks she has a very bad feeling about this. But then someone arrives asking if she's the Massacre Witch, and she immediately draws her swords, saying that some people call her that. But before she could even unsheath her sword, the guy grabs her arm, lifting her up with a single arm, and he says he has nothing against rough introductions, but he's busy, so they'll leave that for another time, saying there's something he needs her to do for him. Meanwhile, Michael is trying to deal with the horn of the 5-horned beast, but his hammer breaks and he falls on his ass on the floor, totally scared, seeing the beast's soul, saying he can't go there. So he wonders how the hell he's supposed to refine a monster like this, and he's shaking with fear in front of it, asking how in the world anyone could deal with that. But then the Proto tells him to get out of there, asking if he forgot their forging, and Makel says that's not it. But the Proto reminds him that he said he'd help, but then the monster starts to attack again, and the Proto tells him to help properly. Dude, there's no way, right? Look at that thing. Only you can kill that thing with a single attack. That thing's tough. And Makel tries to keep helping the Proto, but time after time his tools break and he says he can't do it anymore because his tools can't even scratch that thing and its level is way too high for him to refine. But the Proto says it's not a matter of level. Then he closes Makel's eyes, who doesn't understand a thing. And so the Proto talks about the first stage of awakening, which is doubt, the power to break the true essence by doubting the world. And he says it's to survive, opening Michael's eyes. Then he talks about the second stage of awakening, understanding, which is the power to understand the broken world. Then when he looks at that thing, he sees everything moving as if it were goo and finds that strange. Then that goo starts to take shape, coming out of there, and he wonders what's happening. Seeing the true horror that monster was, he's even more surprised. And then the monster tries to attack him, and the Proto tells him to get out of there, reminding him that he said he would help. Then he asks what this is, wondering if it's the true essence of a five-horned beast. He wonders if he's been using his pathetic skills so casually on a being like that. It can't be. He must be dreaming. Looking at the door, thinking he has to wake up, he says this has to be a dream, but the Proto tries to call him and just gives up. Michael runs out of there screaming for help, but as soon as he gets out, he sees everyone is dead. In the true form that the people there have, he starts to tremble. And everyone outside, who are actually his assistants, ask if the assistant manager is done refining yet. Then he's completely bewildered, looking at the horizon and seeing that black hole up there. And that thing speaks to him, calling him a foolish being, saying he doesn't have the right to see this place yet, and he almost freaks out from having that vision. So he wonders how a world like this exists, and how he ended up in this world. And that vision he had for an instant was the vision the Proto has at all times, being in chaos. Inside, he jumps on top of that thing again to be able to refine its horn. Then he easily subjugates the beast, forcing it down, getting on top of it and preparing to strike again. And the monster even tries to fight back, but the Proto takes a deep breath and lands a single hammer blow on the monster. Makel is still freaking out on the side, questioning things and screaming. After a while, once he gets his head straight, he says that there are futile acts in this world, an existence that prevents changes from happening for the sake of many lives. And he's a human like that, trying to achieve the talent of the nightmares or surpass his natural limits. He assumes he's gotten too old to handle a Garm's horn and that he should have sought him out sooner. And he actually said he didn't come there for him, but for the workshop manager, who is a nightmare. And it's been a while since the manager left, and he apologizes that the only one left is such a pathetic human like himself, questioning how a human who's never even created a tower could be an apprentice. But then the protagonist says his race doesn't matter. It's all fine as long as he can make a sheath, telling him to go ahead, but Makel says no, explaining that he's already tried plenty. However, the protagonist says that he can succeed if he tries 100 million times. He asks, "What do you mean?" He says the protagonist is really young and that he's sure it seems like he isn't trying, but he has already tried very hard, telling Chung-Hoo that he tried while watching him, although he's not sure if the boy will believe him. And the blacksmith in the past told the boy that he had mastered all the skills related to smithing and could now say with certainty that he could repair any weapon from the Nightmare Tower, with a 99% chance of success. But after reaching that success rate, he had a strange thought. Maybe he hadn't been aiming for the 99% chance, but was actually running as hard as he could away from the 1% chance of failure. And with that, the user of whatever it was maxed out. Dude, looking at this, it seems super awesome, but my inner fifth grader is screaming seeing the two-letter user part. Two-letter users. Author. Are you messing with me? And the protagonist says that he is someone who has worked harder than anyone else, but he asks if he knows how the principle of the processing skill works. But Makel finds it strange that he's talking about this, because the Nightmare's processing skill is an original skill, and it's something that has existed since the very beginning. Just like fire and water, questioning how a human can explain the origins of the world. And even if he could, what's the point of explaining one of those things? The protagonist says what he means is that he's been using the skill without understanding what he was doing. And Makel then thinks about it, talking about the principle, which he thinks is to strengthen the hammer and chisel with spiritual power, and channel that power to carve the horn. And if it's such a simple principle, he asks why the other artisans can't use processing, and the protagonist says it's because they haven't managed to learn the skill yet. But then Makel comes to a realization, because if the principle behind this skill is that simple, then even if they haven't learned it, they should probably at least be able to do something similar. And the protagonist says that he doesn't know what this skill is, and yet he's using it, and everyone finds that strange. And Maykal says that he's talking as if there's a human out there who uses a skill while knowing its principle and asks if he knows the principle behind processing. And the protagonist says no, but he figured it out before. So Maykal asks what he's talking about. And the protagonist touches that horn with his finger, and the horn crumbles at the tip, asking how he's been using the processing skill. Then he tells everyone to look closely and say what they're seeing. And they ask if it's the particles breaking down. He says it won't be that easy, and it's because his hard work has also solidified the walls of the world he holds to be true. So he asks what the protagonist is talking about, and he says that there's nothing wrong with hard work, but asks if he doesn't think he should have understood by now. That if he can't do it even after so much hard work, it's not him who's wrong, but the world itself. And hearing this, he finds it strange that the boy is saying the world itself is wrong. Then he remembers the nightmare talking to him, asking if he didn't know why he kept failing, saying that this was good enough for someone like him, and that this was originally a method for nightmares, not humans. So he asks, what is the human method? But the nightmare questions how he's supposed to know and why he would even want to know. After all, he's a nightmare, telling him to just blame the race he was born into. And being human, he can't go beyond the level of an apprentice. But after hearing this, Maykal kept thinking about this human limit, denying it, telling himself that if he worked hard, he was sure he could become like the nightmares. And in the present, Maykal asks the protagonist what he should do, asking how he expects him to fight against the world or something like that. And he says that this is a fair world, where you get results equivalent to the effort you put in, asking what's the problem with getting used to this place. And the protagonist questions it being fair, because how is a world that deceives you and leads you to believe you can't do something when you actually can? Fair in any way. He says he may be old, but he can still fight, telling him to take a closer look, asking him not to rely on the system, but to look with his own two eyes. And with that, he once again uses the power the protagonist had granted him. Then, inside the horn, he also sees that black eye. He looks at him once more. He wonders if the protagonist has always lived seeing the world this way. A human without skills or interference. A fair world, where there are no deceptions. He thinks that someone could only live like that if they were crazy, wondering how. Or is he actually crazy? He also strikes at the horn using the same power that Chung-Ho used. And now he can do what he was asked. And so he asks the protagonist if he's really going to leave just like that. He says that with the production finished, he needs to leave. Besides, it looks like that guy liked it. He probably would have eaten it if he hadn't. And so the blacksmith asks if he's chosen a name for the sword yet, and he even thinks about calling it Pig, but says that no, he hasn't chosen one yet. Then Maykal says that if it's okay with him, he asks if he can name the sword. He decided to base it on the martial language because it sounds cool, and use the characters that mean a being of solitude. And the protagonist asks if he named it Lone Wolf, asking if it's like the one who protects the pack, even if everyone fears him. And Maykal says that's exactly it, saying he doesn't think there's a better name for this sword, and tells him to travel safely. But before the protagonist actually leaves, Maykal asks him to wait, asking the protagonist what he looks like in the world he sees. At this, the protagonist hesitates a bit, saying that he's a human, but Maykal realizes, noticing and remembering the world the protagonist sees, and realizing he doesn't look back. And he wonders if there is anyone else who can understand this lonely world. Bro, the protagonist has basically been living in The Walking Dead 24 hours a day since he got there. It's just a bunch of corpses walking in front of him, dude. Imagine how absurd that is. And that's why he's acting so cold. I'd be shitting my pants, man. Are you crazy? A bunch of badass corpses. Although, he's ultra strong, so maybe not that much. But it's just corpses. It's just corpses all the time. Everyone who talks to him, moves, interacts with him, is just a bunch of dead, decrepit bodies, you know? Many of them are falling to pieces. That girl we saw at the beginning, that really cute chick, you know, we think she'd make a great couple with the protagonist, but he's seeing a corpse, damn it. It's like he's in the Thriller music video 24 hours a day. And after a while, the protagonist asks Mino why she keeps following him. She asks what's up, wondering if he thinks she has some ulterior motive for doing so. He asks if she's planning something again. Then she asks how he knew, saying that she's thinking of a plan to kill him, and saying it all cutesy like that. So he asks what she'll do after killing him, and she says she'll live a good life with his spectral crystal, and he doesn't even take her seriously. She says she's being serious. He just brushes her off, and she says that's a really fake response, but whatever. Handing him something, he asks what it is, and she says it's his clothes, saying it's as a form of apology, and also because she feels like he'll just walk around like a beggar if she leaves him to his own devices. He gets it, and she points out that he's never even come across a nightmare before, asking what he's planning to do. And he says that Michael taught him how to find them, and once he finds the nightmares, he's going to ask them about the Mirage Tree, and also which path to take to get to the Abyss. She questions why he would do that, and he asks if she's curious about his intentions, assuming he somehow manages to get to the Abyss. He says that those who come back from there are called the strong men of the abyss. But he says he's not coming back, and the girl is left completely stunned. When he says he's going to God knows what, because it's censored, she flips out, demanding to know who he is. She asks who the hell he thinks he is to do something like that, what gives him the right, and what kind of asshole doesn't even consider how other people see him, just doing whatever the hell he wants without a thought for anyone else. And more than anything, the fact that he doesn't see the people here as human is what pisses her off the most, because she and the people here are human too. She might not be as strong or tough as him, but she's still human. She says this on the verge of tears, but the protagonist just keeps looking at her with that same pitiful expression. He remembers when she said that even if she dies, she'll die in the present and would never go back to the past. He also remembers Michael, and he starts to see the truth in what the girl is saying, realizing someone is speaking to her telepathically. They're telling her it would be better for her if she stopped thinking about this nonsense, and that if she breaks her promise, the old woman's life will be forfeit. She was supposed to lure him there with her words, and they're asking what the hell she's doing. He realizes there's a hostage, and they're after him. Realizing it's the guys in the alley across the street, he wonders if he should get involved to save the hostage, but he can't see any reason to. After all, to him, it doesn't matter how many of these people he saves. Reality will never change, because all he sees are desecrated corpses. This suspicion shows him the true nature of this world. A world where numbers and data govern everything, filled with people who sold their souls in search of higher numbers. He has to try to get away from her and find the nightmare. But just then, the girl calls out to him, snapping him out of his own little world. She says that, in that sense, she can't see him as human at all, announcing that they're parting ways right here and now. She asks how she could possibly travel with someone who has a goal like that. He doesn't understand a thing, and the girl says they won't be seeing each other again. He wonders, why am I starting to see this woman as human again? And just then, the guy lurking in the alley says the witch betrayed them, ordering them to send the messenger Falcon since they brought all the nightmares here for nothing. But hearing this, the protagonist is surprised that there's a nightmare right here. He wonders if one of them is with those guys, and figures he'll have to change his clothes first. Meanwhile, Mina wonders how it came to this and opens the bar door, apologizing to her aunt, saying she thinks she's really late. But the guy threatening her says she knew this was going to happen, calling her a rookie. And the bar owner says she should have stopped him sooner, saying that it looks like this time she's going to die for real, and it's all her fault. They tell her to shut up, and one of them lunges at the woman. And the elder of the Golden Sky sect, Jania, the oldest of the three brothers, realizes the massacre witch is approaching alone and asks what happened to their agreement. And she says he's even dumber than he looks, asking if he's ever seen a witch keep her promises. She draws her swords, saying that the man won't be attending, because he's on his way to destroy this world, and then she starts attacking all of them. And Jania says it looks like she's gone insane, and they all rush her using the secret shadow arts. And he says they call her the Massacre Witch on the hunting grounds because she uses a skill that summons beasts to her side, asking how about they see if she can do the same thing here. Then the shadows start moving in on the girl, and she has to dodge with everything she's got to get away, but she manages to kill them easily with her flying daggers. But as soon as she hits the ground, Jania grabs his sword and swings it at the girl in an X-shaped arc, hitting her with full force. But she manages to defend herself and is just thrown backward. Then, Jania gets ready to attack again, mocking her title, Massacre Witch, since it seems she's the one getting massacred. Then she thinks to herself, if only they were outside, this would all be different. He says they've put a soundproof barrier around this place, so there's no way anyone outside knows what's going on in here. It's time to stop resisting, so she'd better bring him here right now, saying it's not too late. But she tells him that the shadows will follow him, and he tells her to stop bluffing, because he already knows there isn't a single branch of the shadows in Gorgon Castle. Then they grab the old woman, almost tearing her head off, and he says that by the time the Shadow Warriors find out what happened, she and that old lady will have already been obliterated. So she prepares to use the 7 secret swordsmanship skills of Akaram, Sub-Zero form, launching her swords at them. Jania manages to slice through most of them with a single move, calling it a cute trick. He says he's going to tear her to pieces with his own hands, but after using that attack, she has almost no strength left and nearly collapses right there, remembering when the protagonist asked her if she would go back to the past, if there was a way, and she thinks to herself that she does want to go back to the past, because if she had followed that man, she wonders if she would have seen the end of this world. But then an attack comes flying from outside, aimed at Jania right over her shoulder, and he barely manages to block it. Everyone there is completely confused as the protagonist walks in, and she, for her part, says she hates this kind of plot twist, asking what he's doing here, what about destroying the world, and if he came to save her. But he just tells her that these clothes don't fit, handing the package back to her. She asks if he came all this way just because the clothes didn't fit. She asks, "Are you serious? and one of them notices that he's the guy with the spectral crystal, saying this saves them the trouble of having to find him. And the protagonist comments on how they brought a nightmare here, asking if he's right about that. He asks where the nightmare is. Or rather, he tells them to bring the nightmare to him. My friends, you'd better call for some backup to share this beatdown, because taking it all by yourselves is going to be rough, huh? And they all wonder if this guy is insane, saying they heard he tried to go up against the castle, and it looks like the rumors were true. The guy's got a screw loose, but Mina tells him to be careful, because their 4th stage adapts, and anyone in the upper 4th stage is considered a high-level adapt, so it's not wise to underestimate them. And the protagonist asks if she thinks he's going to lose, and she says no, and on second thought, she realizes he probably won't. Just then, Janya and the others call him shameless and charge at the protagonist, saying they're going to teach him a lesson. But the protagonist just uses a single thrust against them, and Janya jerks his neck out of the way just in time to avoid losing it. The protagonist is surprised he dodged, and one of them remembers that someone said he wasn't an adapt, and Janya wonders if he's one of the strong men of the abyss. The protagonist thinks that the only other thing that has managed to dodge that light thrust so far was that 5-horned monster. Does that mean a 4th stage adapt, and that thing are more or less on the same level? But he thinks, no, because that thing actually withstood a hit. These guys must be weaker, but it doesn't matter. But just then, he hears someone cry out in pain, and Mina starts calling for Claire, and Janya says that if he tries to attack again, she's not going to make it. But Claire tells him not to hesitate and to just attack, and the other guy hits the woman, telling her to shut her mouth if she doesn't want to get beaten. Then Mino tells his aunt to wait, that they'll rescue her soon, and she asks the protagonist if he can do it. Then he questions why she's asking him that, since he came here to find a nightmare and all he has to do is get rid of them, whether they're hostages or enemies. But then the girl says that she's the human one, begging him not to do it. He remembers everyone, her smile, and also her lament, and is touched by something. This happens while he's looking at everyone there with his true vision, seeing a bunch of corpses. And Claire, on the floor, asks why he's hesitating, telling him to attack already, and in his vision, everyone is dead. But she starts coming back to life as she tells him to attack now, and he gets more and more irritated by this, attacking upwards and opening a huge-ass hole in the middle of the establishment. And everyone outside wonders what's happening, and apparently Calton already knows what that is and tells everyone to get going. And from inside, their sub-chief says this is terrible because the soundproof barrier has been broken, and Jean feels like shit is about to hit the fan. Then Calton arrives, orders them to surround the place, and notices Jean inside, questioning what's going on. And the protagonist says he's just in time, telling him that these guys broke the laws he loves so much. He doesn't know all the details, but they broke what seems to be the Gorgon Law. Article 276, Paragraph 4. They seem to have planned to use this place as a starting point to destroy the world, but the idiot behind them says he's the one who wants to destroy the world. Calton just listens to them, saying that according to the law he just cited, Paragraph 6, he will make an emergency arrest for illegally invading private property inside the castle and kidnapping a citizen. And one of them sees the hand sign he's using, and Jean tells everyone to fall back. But then Calton questions if they think they can run from him, using the silver prison which sends those chains at them, trapping everyone. Then he also pulls out his axe, and all the while Jean tells him not to make him laugh, attacking him again, and the two lock into a struggle of strength. And this happens while Calton stands still, and Jean trembles all over from the pressure Calton is putting on him, until his sword breaks, but he jumps to attack again. Calton uses the silver prison once more, throwing those chains at him, bringing him to the ground, and with that, he's completely finished on the floor with that axe at his neck. And so he says he surrenders, and Calton says that was a wise choice, restraining him completely. However, Jean says they were right about him being innocent, just like now, taking out a smoke bomb and throwing it behind him. And that smoke bomb fills the entire area, and after Jean escapes, he's surprised, thinking he would have to use the black cloud there. And one of them says that someone from the group seems to have inhaled some of the black cloud, and another says he's an idiot, because they told him to always keep his mask on properly, and tells him to wait a bit, because he might survive if he only inhaled a little. But another one arrives, surprised that they used the black cloud without the sect leader's permission, questioning if the massacre witch is really that valuable. And that's the elder of the Golden Sky sect, the sex demon. It's me, Lang. Hold on, dude. Sex demon? No way, man. Dude, what a male succubus? I don't remember what a male succubus is called, but a sex demon just showed up out of nowhere. Couldn't even be the demon of lust to tone it down a bit. It's the demon of snoo-snoo. And he asks if they didn't say they would hand her over when they caught her, saying that he doesn't like it when they're dead. I think I know what he's planning to do with her, but I don't think it's a good thing to say out loud. I don't think you two will like it. But one of them says it wasn't because of the witch, and the silver prison was there. He was surprised that annoying chain guy is here. and they confirm it. So Lang says it's a good thing if he inhaled the black cloud, saying it will be a great scene to watch. But then he notices something, speaking to Dionea and asking who that bastard is who's walking out of there without a mask. And the protagonist already readies his sword to launch an attack and throws a thrust in their direction. And everyone wonders who he is, but Jean wants to find out, not understanding how he's fine after inhaling the black cloud. They've never heard of a green Pieris without an antenna, and not even a green Pieris should be able to do something like that. While Mino is in bad shape, the protagonist thinks this must be the rest of their squad. Thinking they're way too annoying, he prepares to attack for real this time. And the protagonist then raises his sword and says he didn't want to have to do this, because having to depend on something like items is just too much. But he stabs the sword into the ground, using Garnar's dignity, and everyone there is surprised, noticing that it's the roar of the five-horned beast. Then that roar knocks out most of them, and the protagonist goes after Jean and the demon, who asks what kind of monster this is, telling him to take care of it and getting the hell out of there, running. And Jean doesn't like that one bit, looking at Jae-mung and also at Jang. And the two of them are down on the ground, and he wonders why things had to end up like this. And the protagonist says there's a way he can get out of there alive, telling him to answer, "Where is the nightmare they hid?" He questions that, saying that if he tells him, there's no way he'll survive, because when he finds out, he'll only wish he had died sooner. And the protagonist notices he talked about himself, so he says he'll die one way or another. Then he takes the crystal and eats it, and the protagonist realizes it's the spectral crystal. He remembers when he told Mino that everyone there seems to be on some kind of narcotic, and she says that's a misunderstanding, that they aren't narcotics. It's something you have to do to reduce this spiritual corruption, because there's no one who wishes to be a ghoul, and apparently he's turning into a ghoul. Then Jean, who ate that, starts having a bunch of black threads coming out of his body. Those threads take over his entire form, and everyone around him is scared to death because now he's like a pitch-black gorilla with a bunch of disgusting threads coming out of his mouth. He's become gigantic, and the protagonist says that's a ghoul, and it starts attacking everyone around, wanting to kill no matter who it is. And he's now seeing the world the same way the protagonist sees it, realizing that this is the truth of this world. And now also seeing the same eye tree that he saw, asking what's the use of having any dignity in a world like this. And he even questions why he was so scared when he could be free like this. But then two eyes fall upon him. He gets terrified and turns, looking for the protagonist, questioning if he went over there. But when he launches his vines at the protagonist, he can't reach him and sees that the protagonist has truly always been this way. He notes that in a world like that, how can a human even exist? And the protagonist questions what's his problem, because even when he uses suspicion, he can't see his true essence. But either way, he points his sword at him, thinking it doesn't matter. Then he gets really pissed, and the protagonist uses his thrust once more, and that thrust goes straight to the ghoul's head, tearing it from its body. And when Jean's head falls to the ground, he starts to remember his past, thinking that it's raining again. And he remembers the past while looking at the protagonist in front of him and all those dead corpses around. And with that, everything starts to calm down, and the protagonist picks up his sword again, wondering what exactly this guy is. He says he hopes one of the others knows the nightmare's whereabouts and leaves, leaving all that destruction behind. And after that, they say it's better not to get close to Mino and say she's still sick. And one of them arrives, calling for his chief. And the one who's even more broken is Calton himself, and he tells them to hurry, because they have to warn the inner castle. However, Mino begs the protagonist, "Please, kill me while I'm still myself." And with that, the protagonist starts to think this person is human, and that he couldn't use comprehend on her because his suspicion wavered every time he tried. He wonders, why would the dead collapse? However, emotions aren't necessary for the path he's on. He must not hesitate. But then, Claire grabs his hand, saying it might not be too late. But then one of the men who came to save everyone says she needs to go to the hospital right now, but she asks him to wait a little, please. And just like that, they really take Mino with them. They wonder if this woman can even survive and say there's no chance if the ghoulification keeps progressing like this. The protagonist watches from a distance as several emergency alerts appear. A Gorgon Class 4 and lesser ghouls have appeared inside the castle. Everyone starts running and screaming, wondering what's happening, while guards order the citizens to evacuate immediately. And one of them asks where they're supposed to go, but he asks the wrong person, because that guard is already turning into a ghoul. It lunges at him, killing everyone in its path. And many more die as the troops arrive to save the others. And the guy who shows up, he doesn't look like a pushover. As the protagonist watches from inside the tent, Claire asks if he's the person Mino mentioned, the one capable of ignoring all the rules of this place. She says he judges the world by his own standards while holding firm to his humanity. She says she knows people like him well, that she's seen them before, people who don't fit in here because they're stupid. They do it because they have no other choice. However, the protagonist says that what she really meant is that they don't have the courage. And she asks, Courage for what? For some higher ideal or a more just will? She bets that he's the type of person who chases after those things, and he's probably right. She doesn't know what he's thinking because she doesn't have the courage. But there's one thing she knows for sure. He's dangerous, and he thinks to himself that he wishes she wouldn't leave. Then Claire tells him he needs to get out of there. He recalls Claire saying it's because people gained hope when they saw him. But Claire says that if he stays, people will become even more hopeful, and that people like him are what keep her from giving up on this world. And he remembers Mino begging him, "Please, don't give up on this world." Then someone asks how much medicine is left, and the doctor says that since they used so much to stabilize the Castellan, there's not much left. Everyone's spirits sink. James then orders them to bring all the medicine they have in reserve. Meanwhile, the protagonist watches them make the medicine, wondering if that's the horn of a beast, and noting that's how it's used. They think that not even the horn of a three-horned beast is enough to purify him, urging their chief to hang on a little longer. But the protagonist asks if there isn't any way to bring someone back once they've turned into a ghoul. And James says, "If I knew a way, why would I be doing this?" The protagonist tells him to wake up already, because he has something to ask him. He then grabs Seaton and slaps him across the face. James demands to know how he could do that to his chief, but Seaton actually starts to come to. James is shocked to see Seaton speaking, saying he has a favor to ask, for him to kill him, because he's the only one who can. But the protagonist asks, "Shouldn't you normally ask someone to save you in a situation like this?" And he talks about the Gorgon Special Law, Article 1, Paragraph 4. Anyone in whom the corruption begins must be terminated. The protagonist thinks that's a really stupid kind of loyalty, but then he thinks that if he'd had a few guys like him, he wouldn't have been stuck in that damn tower for 40 years. And so the alerts continue, stating that his spiritual corruption has reached 94%, and the ghoulification will begin shortly. Just then, someone orders everyone to get back quickly. It's the commander of the Grand Ghoul Extermination Squad, a 5th stage adapted. James, seeing him, gets more and more scared, and Jarir declares that according to Article 1, Paragraph 4 of the Gorgon Special Law, he must immediately execute Seaton, chief of the Northern Post, and one other individual. But then the protagonist stops his sword with just his bare hand, preventing him from doing it. Jarir is stunned. The protagonist says he can't kill this guy, stating that he still has something to ask him. At this, Jarir is shocked that he blocked his sword with his bare hands, saying he doesn't know who he is. But Sokton will soon turn into a ghoul, and the ghoulification of a 5th stage adapted will cause a terrible disaster. We're just trying to prevent that. But the protagonist doubts he'll turn into a ghoul, saying he thinks that thing over there can stop the process. They notice it's the horn of a Ganark, saying they might have a chance with it. And the protagonist simply takes the horn and shatters it with his bare hands. They're horrified that he's handling such a valuable material with so much brute force. Then he shoves the medicine made from it into the mouths of both Seaton and Mino. They report that, fortunately, the monitoring equipment shows his value isn't increasing. But something goes wrong with Mino. They say she's so weakened that the ghoulification isn't stopping, and the level has reached 95%. They say it can't be stopped anymore, and order someone to call Sion Gare. Claire says she knows that old man is capable of performing the ghoul cut. The protagonist listens to this intently, and she says she heard the ghoul cut separates the corruption itself. Then, one of them says the doctor is in the inner castle handling important matters, and they can't just call him for this. "Just for this?" she questions. Then Jarir says he can't let this go on and tells the protagonist to get out of the way. But he doesn't seem to want to, already drawing his sword to resolve this with brute force. He says he'll kill the woman himself, since she asked him to do it. Jarir falls silent, listening to the protagonist and accepting what he's saying. Then he uses suspicion, and Claire demands to know what he's doing, telling him to stop right now. But as he does, he sees that suspicion is leading him to a point right in the middle of her chest. Then, with extreme care, he begins his attack. But just then, something erupts from the ground and pulls him into a completely white space. He wonders what's happening. And then, an old man appears, asking what happened to his Mino. He pities the poor child and asks to help, but then he looks at the protagonist, demanding to know who he is and how he entered his world. But looking closer, he asks why such a noble soul is emitting such weak energy, saying it's as if he were a 5-year-old child. The protagonist realizes suspicion isn't working on him and wonders if this old man is the source of the spiritual corruption. He thinks that if he kills him, he might be able to save the woman. But the old man simply returns his attack, stopping the protagonist's charge. He's surprised that the man stopped his sword, but the old man also asks how he managed to stop his normal cut. He notices that not only was the normal cut stopped, but his entire sword is in tatters, and behind him are a ton of cracks. At this, Jarir is shocked, realizing what the protagonist is doing. That same old man from before demands to know how he dares do this in his world, asking who the protagonist is. And when he looks at his hand, he sees his sword is completely shattered. he sees that his precious sword, made from the horn of a four-horned beast, ended up like this. He curses him out, because his beloved sword is totally broken. But the protagonist wonders to himself if the old man wasn't the one who broke it. And with that, Mr. Chang Gerot, the doctor of despair, starts to think for a moment, understanding the whole situation. Jarir speaks to him, asking about the Castellan and what he's doing there. And he asks why he should care about the Castellan when there's a lovely lady about to die. Jarir sputters, "What did you just say?" But then he moves on to something even more important, turning to the protagonist and demanding to know what he's going to do now that he's ruined his ghoul cut. And the ghoul cut can only be performed with a sword made from the horn of a beast that has at least 4 horns. But, looking at the protagonist's sword, he wonders what kind of blade it is and goes up to Chung-Hu, asking where he got this little beauty. He notices the sharp blade and the sheath made from the horn of a 5-horned beast, asking how he got it. But the protagonist grabs the old man's hand, nearly breaking it, and asks if he can save that woman by lending him the sword. He says of course he can, asking if the protagonist is doubting him. Chung-Hu then hands his sword to the man with absurd ease. The man is surprised that he would hand over his own sword to a stranger without hesitation, and thinks that unless one has complete conviction in their own abilities, no one would do that. But in reality, he thinks that doesn't matter now, noticing that the sword has a very strange energy, just like its owner. Then everyone watches him perform that slash, and the man imbues all his strength into it, preparing the cut from his stance to the tip of the blade. He says it's time to show off these skills a bit. At that, the brother starts to ask if it's an optical illusion, as that white hue takes over the area, but he thinks that's not it, and it's similar to how he sees things using suspicion. Then the doctor tells him to be patient, as this will be over soon, and charges into the attack. And the protagonist thinks that this is how that old geezer sees the world. But then, the old man simply drops the sword to the ground and collapses, completely powerless. The protagonist calls out to him, and the old man says it's because he doesn't have enough spiritual energy. And if it weren't for that damned Castellan, none of this would have to be this way. But the protagonist sees that everything is closing in and the world is crumbling. The young woman's painting isn't appearing there, and the old man doesn't want his portrait to fall apart, saying he's sorry and that this is quite embarrassing. But the protagonist picks up the sword again. The old man says it's foolish, since he couldn't even integrate into his world, yet he's trying to imitate his ghoul slash, and he says that he can't cut it. But still, even if it's just a copy, he's going to try. But the doctor tells him to stop, saying that the ghoul slash isn't something just anyone can do. However, the protagonist says he's mistaken, stating that what he's doing now isn't an act of bravery, but one of responsibility. And he remembers when Claire said that people like him piss her off, and he tells everyone to shut up, because for the first time in his life, he has picked up a sword to save someone, and he begins to enter the same world the old man lives in. The man then asks what the hell the kid is doing, and the protagonist wonders what that girl looked like again and tries to recreate her, painting her completely. He remembers she was a stubborn prankster, and despite being an assassin, she herself was vulnerable and loyal. He feels like something is missing, but as he thinks about it, he draws a mole under her eye, saying that she believes in people, and paints a beautiful portrait of her on that canvas. And with that, he thanks the old man for remembering she had a birthmark, and just like that, the girl actually heals, smiling at him. Then her corruption level starts to drop and the ghoulification seems to have stopped. Jaehwan says he can't believe it, while Claire runs to her, asking if she's okay. But B asks, why is she crying? And the doctor approaches the protagonist, saying he seems less stupid now, even though his spiritual energy has gone from 5 to 10 years at most. He asks anyway who the kid is, saying ghoul slash, or rather ghoul thrust, and questioning where he learned such a thing. But then Jaehwan speaks to the doctor, asking if this man really used something similar to the ghoul slash. He says he didn't want to acknowledge it, but that was indeed the case, explaining that his ghoul slash is an ability. Because of that, no adapted has ever managed to learn it. And the doctor says that, just like him, he is an awakened. And the awakened are ordinary beings who manage to escape the rules of the system. And they are a small minority of humans who have miraculously obtained powerful strength by rejecting adaptation. They possess enough power to completely change the power dynamics in chaos. And even in the entire Great Land, there are only a few known people called the Awakened. Jaehwan notes that because he's an awakened like him, he was able to use the ghoul slash, thinking that in that case, things might get better. But the doctor tells him to calm down, saying he still doesn't know his identity. But Jaehwan remembers that he had said if there were another person capable of using his ghoul slash, it would be possible to save the Castellan. And he tells the doctor that there is nothing more important than the Castellan's life. But then, some people enter the place, saying they have permission from the inner castle and telling them to get out of the way. Jaehwan looks at those men in black, noticing it's the captain of the Black Shadows, and he is the captain of the Black Shadows, a 5th stage adapted. And Jaehwan questions why those bastards are here, since the Black Shadows squad should have nothing to do with ghoul extermination. Not to mention that his squad has already taken care of all the ghouls. But then, they enter the place, kneeling before the protagonist and hailing him as the envoy of the Green Pieris. Yes, they still believe that the protagonist who killed everyone in that clan is their envoy, and he asks if the esteemed guest could come to the inner castle with them. Looking to the side, he asks why the extermination captain and the doctor are here, and they start to question if the protagonist is the envoy of the Green Pieris. Later, together with the Castellan, he thinks that they have finally met, speaking to Chunghu and saying that, before they get to the main topic, an introduction is necessary, stating that his name is Yurin Shiver and that he is the commander of Gorgon Castle, and he tells the protagonist that he'll get straight to the point. He asks if the protagonist is an envoy of the Green Pieris, and the protagonist says no. The Castellan reveals that he already suspected as much, and the captain of the Black Shadows is shocked by this. At this, the doctor says he wants to ask him something, explaining that the spectral crystal is famous for amplifying spiritual power, but they are normally an object that proves the identity of the members of the Green Pieris clan. So, if he's not a member of their clan, where did he get those crystals? Besides that, he asks how he can use them without his spirit shattering, and the protagonist says he just picked them up and that he can just use them. At that, he asks what happened to the original bearers of the crystals, and the protagonist says they're dead. And Jaehwan questions this, asking who would harm members of one of the 5 noble clans of the Great Land, and the protagonist says that he killed them himself, leaving Jaehwan shocked. And Yurin tells him not to be so shocked, saying that Chunghu must have had his reasons, and they are all perplexed by that. He says they attacked him first and wanted to take a horn he had, and that's why he fought them. And Yurin remembers that the Green Pieris clan is a very greedy group when it comes to materials, so that's what happened. He speaks with Chunghu, asking if he can tell him more about what happened after he arrived in Chaos. And after he tells him everything, Yurin gets straight to the point, noting that he coincidentally ended up getting caught in something that brought him to Chaos. And he coincidentally got his hands on the spectral crystals of the Green Pieris clan and entered the castle. Then, he coincidentally got into this mess and met the doctor, attempting to perform the slash he had seen for the first time that day. And with that, he understands everything. The doctor then asks if he really believes that guy. Yurin says that he does. The doctor then asks if something happened to his head because of the Castellan's disappearance. But Yurin tells the doctor that to earn someone's trust, you must first trust them. And Yurin asks if he can ask him a few more questions, if that's all right with him. The protagonist agrees. Yurin then asks if his body is currently alive. And the protagonist is shocked by that question, as he apparently wasn't expecting it. He remembers that he didn't enter the main game and, in fact, was forcibly ejected from the Tower of Nightmares. And since he was in a spiritual body state, it's pretty likely the Mirage Tree got confused, saw him as an envoy, and sent him to Chaos. And so he says that as for his body, it's probably still on Earth. And he asks how Yurin knew he wasn't dead. And he mentions that the Jaehwan told him he coincidentally got caught up in something he brought to Chaos, saying that no one in Chaos would describe their own death like that. And he asks if the Jaehwan is being threatened by someone, wondering if that's the reason he doesn't want to reveal his identity. And the Jaehwan says he neither agrees nor disagrees. And so he notes that he's saying both yes and no. And truth be told, he needs to apologize for a few things, because for the last 4 days, his subordinates have been watching him. And he says he knows, since the guy on the roof must have been one of them. And so Yurin realizes he was aware, saying that his abilities so far exceeded their expectations that just keeping an eye on him was tough, but that doesn't mean they got nothing. And a big chunk of what the Jaehwan did was described in some reports. He says his danger rating was classified as SS, and the target's power level was deemed incalculable, and the estimated financial damages caused were approximately 300 million roran. He asks if he knows what people like that are called, and the doctor chimes in, saying he's a crazy psycho. Then Yurin says he doesn't know if he's a hero or a villain, and the doctor keeps saying that the Jaehwan is just a lunatic. Then Yurin says that some called him a hero and others called him a madman, saying he's sure people will call him by various names. As for him, he calls people like him a protagonist. Man, what a beautiful fourth wall break. Deadpool would be so proud. And he says there's a common trait among protagonists, saying that they're famous. But the Jaehwan? I gotta tell you something, Jaehwan. I gotta tell you something. This is a webtoon and you're being narrated by some Brazilian guy from Chique Bahia. However, Yurin says that it seems he's not famous at all, which means something is purposefully restricting information about him. And this faction doesn't seem to be friendly with him, because if they were the puppet masters behind everything, he wouldn't have had trouble with a simple ID certificate. and he says he thinks he's a protagonist who just so happened to escape to chaos to try and get away from some bigger faction. The Jaehwan thinks about this faction, saying he's not sure, but maybe it's the Black Monarch, one of the 12 monarchs of the Great Land, and he wonders just how strong these monarchs are. Then Yurin says he won't ask for his identity. They won't charge him for the damages he caused, and Gorgon Castle will protect him. But the Jaehwan asks if Gorgon Castle is strong enough to take on the 12 monarchs of the Great Land. Yurin asks if he's after the 12 monarchs, but the Jaehwan says he might be one of them. Yurin says he has good news, because monarchs can't directly interfere with what happens inside chaos. And the Jaehwan then asks what he wants in return. He says that Jaehwan just needs to do them one favor, asking him to please save their castle lord. And so, 2 hours later, we're told that the chief of the northern checkpoint and the woman are recovering in the infirmary. But one of the guards asks if he really wants them to take him to the training grounds instead of the guest hall. And the doctor says they need to decide what's stronger, his slash or the guy's stab. And the Jaehwan says that apparently that's what he wants. But the doctor tells him he must be one of those who cleared the master's tower. And the Jaehwan is immediately interested in what the old geezer is saying, asking if he knows something. He says he knows what he needs to know, and so they're taken to the training ground. And the old man says that if he can beat him, he'll answer all the questions he has. Although he's sure that'll be impossible. But after just a few minutes, the Jaehwan simply slams the old man into the ground, and from inside the hole, he starts calling for Jaehwan to go again. But the Jaehwan says he thinks the results are already settled, and the training hall looks like a mosquito-infested house when you just go around slapping them on the wall. My friend, if the elder abuse laws saw this, you'd be so screwed, man. And the old man starts saying he hasn't used his final technique yet, because if he did, the Jaehwan could die, and he was holding back because he's worried about him. But the Jaehwan is already pissed off, because he's been saying the same thing over and over. The old man keeps calling him rude, asking how old he is. The Jaehwan says, probably 60 or something, and he starts cussing the kid out, saying he's 1,000 years old, and he's only been stabbing for 60 years, saying there's no way he can defeat him, who's been slashing for a whole 1,000 years. And the Jaehwan questions if he's really been slashing for 1,000 years. And he's like, that's right. But the Jaehwan says that to him, it looks like he's been doing it for 10 years tops. However, when he says that, the old man gets super pissed, jumps out of there, cussing out the Jaehwan and preparing another attack. He'll see if he can still say that after taking this, summoning a massive freaking dragon around his sword. And the Jaehwan returns his attack with another stab. And when their two powers clash, the Jaehwan is surprised and ends up getting pushed back along with the doctor. And the doctor says that wasn't half bad. The Jaehwan is surprised he was sent flying back that far, even after using a normal stab. And the doctor says his technique is pretty useful, asking what he calls it. He says it's normal stab. And the Jaehwan realizes this guy is completely nuts for calling it that, asking how that could possibly be normal. And with a name like that, you'd think there was a stronger technique. And the Jaehwan says there is, getting ready to launch it, aiming that rifle of his at the old man, saying, yeah, there's a stronger one. Then he questions what that is, and in the doctor's eyes, he literally sees the one king of chaos as the Jaehwan is about to kill him. I'm feeling the same emotion I got when Gon dragged Shiapoof away with Morel. On that day, not even the smoke from what Morel was constantly smoking could pass through his butthole. Son. Then the old man questions how he could have forgotten the fear of facing him, and he notes that the kid is making him think of the one king, asking himself if he can really cut something like that. He thinks that he might not be on the same level as the one king, but with an attack that powerful, Gorgon Castle or whatever is going down. And the Jaehwan says, here I come, but the old man tells him to wait, saying he accepts defeat. Meanwhile, in the Great Land, in the 5th region, the Metal region, someone is asking them to repeat what they were just talking about, asking what that damn monarch bastard did. Then they say that according to their investigation, the Black Monarch is currently in contact with Chaos, and the Metal Monarch, unyielding Metal Ryu, questions why Chaos, since all monarchs of the Great Land are supposed to be part of the pact that prevents them from interfering in the affairs of Chaos. And so, his subordinate says it's a bit complicated, asking him to take a look at the screen. Then he sees everything the Jaehwan has done recently, and he says that's the video that's been circulating under the name Solo Clear of the 29th floor or whatever. And he asks what's up with it, wondering if the video isn't a fake. And the subordinate says that the individual in the video is someone the Black Monarch of the 9th region was going to hire. He asks where that individual is now. And the subordinate says that as it turns out, after refusing to complete the tutorial, he broke through the tower's ceiling and they say he escaped to Chaos. But the Monarch asks how that's possible, because the cultivator was supposed to be keeping an eye on the 100th floor. But the subordinate says the Jaehwan killed the cultivator, and the Monarch gets interested in that. He says he couldn't believe it either, but the Black Monarch seemed convinced. And so, the Iron Monarch wonders if those bastards from the Ninth Region have a connection to chaos. The subordinate says it's something they discovered recently, but the Black Monarch has been interfering with chaos for a long time, and some of the 10 sects of chaos have been in regular communication with the Black Monarch. So, the Iron Monarch asks what he's planning to do and tells him to send a message so he can travel to chaos. But then the subordinate asks if his master is planning to interfere with chaos. He says he's just going to keep an eye on things to understand what's happening, asking him to send 10 Gold Rank 1 elite warriors and Ri Zhang. He says that 5th stage adapted should suffice, and the subordinate agrees, thankful that he isn't screaming at him today. And so, the Iron Monarch keeps thinking about chaos, wondering how Shang-Ar is doing. He would have lived a long life if he didn't have such a hot-headed personality. Hopefully, he's staying out of trouble over there. But in reality, the old man is half dead and clinging to the protagonist's sword, saying he can't let him do this and asking how he can't respect his elders. The protagonist tells him to get off, saying he gets it already, thinking that he really looks like a fly stuck to the sword. When the old man falls, he asks how this is possible, wondering how he could do something like that after only a few thrusts in 40 years. And he says he thinks it's because he's done about 10 billion thrusts. The old man tells him to stop lying, since that would mean he'd have to go without eating, sleeping, or anything else just to thrust at least 8 times per second. But the protagonist shocks him, saying he can thrust up to 100 times in 1 second, and he asks the old man what makes him think you can only thrust with a sword. And so, his entire body is thrusting, even at that very moment. The old man is surprised that the harsh, strange energy he felt the first time he saw him isn't real energy, nor is it something like a combat spirit. It's his hostility and his intent to refine the world. And so, when he brings his finger close to the protagonist, he feels the thrust on his skin, thinking that this is a thrust. He says he can't believe it, realizing the protagonist has become the thrust itself. Man, for real, I don't think I know any protagonist who's as much of a psychopath in training as this guy. The dude is completely immersed, dying to kill and stab someone at any given moment. Imagine walking next to a psycho like that. Are you crazy? It's like having an obsessive spirit breathing down your neck, and the old man notices that he has been thrusting at the world non-stop, even at that very moment. And Chung-Hoo says he already told him, stating that he's done 10 billion thrusts. But anyway, he asks if the old man remembers that piece of paper, showing him the contract they wrote before dueling, where the loser grants the winner 1 wish. He then reads what Shang-H wrote, saying that he, the Doctor of Despair, promises on his honor and all the beauties of the world that he will follow that contract. Then the old man says he gets it, asking if Chung-Hoo is planning to use him as a slave. He says he doesn't need that. His request is simple. Answer his questions honestly, that's all. The old man says that's fine, but asks him to go for a walk outside for a bit. And so, he asks the old man what a master's tower is. But Shang-H asks if he knows that it's nightmares that create the towers, and says that the towers created by nightmares range from rank F to S, but there are nightmares that have no interest in ranks. He says that masters are those who have managed to turn an S-ranker into an apprentice and have previously become a master craftsman. But just because it was made by a master doesn't automatically mean it's a master's tower. Only the special towers created without any relation to cultivation can be called a master's tower. Chung-Hoo then asks why these towers are created. Shang-H says he doesn't know either, as no one knows what the masters are thinking. He says that, from what people say, masters are the ones who are after the world's truth. But one thing is for sure, from time to time, there are awakened ones among those who clear a master's tower. At this, Chung-Hoo asks if he's also from a master's tower. The old man says he came from the 4th master's tower, Mervu. It's a tower known in the world as Mob Tick. A giant whale appeared on the 1st floor of the tower and constantly went after people. The difficulty might sound hilarious now, but back in his day, it was like a calamity, and many martial masters from the martial realm died that way. It was a miracle that he managed to clear the tower. When he reached the 100th floor with his friends, he saw an octopus-shaped demon. He assumes Chung-Hoo is from a master's tower too, asking him whose tower he cleared. And Chung-Hoo says it was Moloch, or at least he thinks that was the name. The old man looks back in surprise and says that to think there'd be an awakened one who cleared Moloch's tower is just incredible. Chung-Hoo asks if he knows him. He says, of course he does, as they used to go on journeys together, and Chung-Hoo is even more surprised to hear what the old man is saying. So, Chung-Hoo confirms if he really went on journeys with Moloch. The old man says it's a bit of a long story, telling him they'll walk while he tells it. And so they go to a festival, and the old man goes up to Clara, saying he'll have a horned beast kebab and asking if her stall is open now. She says it's because a certain guy destroyed her shop, and that certain guy is sitting right there. Then she serves them 2 beers. But the old man teases her for opening her shop right after what happened earlier, saying she must really love money. Clara just tells him to drink his beer and shut up. As Chung-Hoo looks at the food, he also sees the people around them, and the old man says he must have felt that something was strange. and Chung-hoo finds it strange that he knows that. Shang-H says the people don't look alive, and yet there's food in a world where you can't feel hunger. He says that chaos was originally a blessed world, a place where souls tired of the war on the great land came to rest, and all beings rediscovered their lives after being freed from life itself. Swordsmen and archers laid down their arms, and bards sang for peace instead of war. But then a fight breaks out nearby, catching their attention, and Shang-H asks what it looks like to him. Chung-hoo asks if they aren't just regular drunks, but then he notices something, realizing his drink tastes like water. Then the old man says, "That's right. They aren't drunk, they're just pretending, because you can't get drunk, feel hungry, or even grow old in chaos." But even in this paradise, humans are flawed, especially in the way they keep searching for their real lives, where death existed, and start imitating the actions they had in their past lives. A life where you die if you don't eat and get drunk when you go out for a drink. A life where you have a body and a beating heart. He says that's when people started to adopt new behaviors, and people gathered to reclaim their real lives. An expedition squad dreaming of the impossible. And that was the Abyss Expedition Squad. The old man gets very excited about this, but Chung-hoo isn't as thrilled. When asked why they went to the Abyss, he replies that it's to find the fruit of resurrection. The old man thinks he had a terrible reaction. Shang-H says it's the fruit from a branch of the mirage tree, which is at the end of the abyss. Chung-hoo then asks about this resurrection, wondering if it's possible for a dead person to come back to life. The old man says that's right, explaining that the only way a person in this world can come back to life is by eating the fruit of resurrection. The Abyss Expedition Squad was an alliance to find that fruit. That was when he awakened, a time when he feared nothing, and was only 150 years old. And Chung-hoo asks him if he's saying that Moloch was part of that expedition. And Shang says that's right, remembering what Moloch was like, saying he was the chief who led the expedition squad and that guy was a real character. And he remembers when Moloch found him on the battlefield, saying that he's an interesting awakened one. He said he even had an incomplete awakening where he didn't abandon his emotions, adding that Shang is heading down a very strange path of awakening. He bets it's been tough, but the old man, at first, just told him to screw himself. Moloch says he seems pissed off about what happened during the cultivation, but the old man just attacks him out of nowhere, questioning why a nightmare is going to the abyss, asking if they aren't all just wretches, who normally just build towers while holed up in their workshops all day. But Moloch says he has nothing to say in response and that it wouldn't do any good, even if he apologized on behalf of all the nightmares. He says he's never heard of that before. He says this is the karma he has to carry for the rest of his life. Shang says he's a nightmare who regretted creating a tower. He might not believe him, but the reason he entered the mirage tree and went to the abyss was because of that tower. He says it's so he can put an end to all cultivation. And that was his goal behind joining the expedition. The protagonist is surprised by this motivation. He says he ended up getting caught in the middle, so he only reached the early parts of the abyss, but it seems Moloch managed to get to the top of the mirage tree as fruits began to fall from the branches, and thanks to that, everyone on the expedition was able to carry armfuls of fruit back to chaos. But the protagonist realizes something, because if he got a resurrection fruit, he questions why that old geezer is still here. Then Claire says he should tell the story straight, saying that the expedition failed and the old man knows it. But Shang questions how she could possibly know since she wasn't even there when it happened. And she says they were successful up until they got the fruit, and the old man says that's right. At the entrance leading back to chaos, there were some guys waiting for them. And those were the monarchs and lords of the great land, cowards who weren't brave enough to enter the abyss. But the masters of the 4 castles and the leaders of the 10 sects were no match for them. It was a massive difference in power. Their spiritual level was on a whole other plane, and that's how their fruits were stolen from them. And they just keep coming back to life endlessly whenever they die with those fruits. And it's been like that for 900 years. It got to the point where a place called the Palace of Resurrection was made for those bastards. And whenever a monarch from one of the 5 noble clans dies, he's immediately resurrected. It was decided from the very beginning who would get to live a worthy life. And the protagonist notices that's why this place is so devoid of life, realizing they know they can never achieve real life or the fruit. And he asks about Moloch, talking to the old man, but he's passed out drunk. He says it's no use because that damned old man really gets wasted, saying it might be the result of pretending for 1,000 years. And she says that anyway. From what she's heard, no one saw that nightmare after the expedition. And apparently, he disappeared after leaving behind his final words. And he said that he failed, but at the same time, he didn't. And James arrives to talk about it, thanking him for what he did earlier, saying that if it weren't for him, his boss would have died. The protagonist doesn't understand a thing. James says Juna has already forgotten him and puts his cap back on, saying that anyway, from now on he should always enter Gorgon from the north, mentioning that he knows his face and won't ask for a certificate. And of course, he must keep this a secret from the boss. And so he leaves as if he'd done something amazing. But the protagonist just keeps thinking, but then Jair arrives, calling for Chung-He and the doctor. They're surprised to see the captain of extermination there, and he approaches with a very scared look on his face, saying they have a problem. And then, as they head towards the Castellan, getting close to the castle, he already feels that energy, understanding everything, realizing that this is the state the Castellan is in. He notes that it's a ghoul, and this is at least a few dozen times stronger than the spiritual pressure he felt from the ghouls in And it seems to be coming from beneath the castle. And then he remembers Jair talking to him, saying they won't charge him for the damages he caused to the castle, and they will protect him, and that in return, he would only need to do one thing, which is to save their Castellan. And the protagonist realizes the Castellan is undergoing ghoulification. He says that's right, and that he had a sudden attack that day. Normally, it only happens once a week. This one happened sooner than expected, and he doesn't want the protagonist to get the wrong idea. Their Castellan is an incredible man. Before the ghoulification started, he was a living legend and one of the few people who participated in the Abyss expedition with the doctor. The protagonist is very surprised by this, but Jair says that now that he thinks about it, the protagonist can also perform the ghoul slash. Seeing that the doctor is in that state, he asks if the protagonist doesn't think he could replace him, but the protagonist says no, explaining that he can barely imitate it and is nowhere near that old geezer's level. He says if the old man taught him, maybe, but just then they get close. And so Jair notices that tremor, not believing that things have gone south. But everything starts turning into a mess over there, and they realize the Castellan has already completely transformed. But when Jair looks ahead, he notices that those guys are the chief of the defensive horn and the captain of the twisted horn, and they say they haven't seen each other in a long time. Then one of them speaks to Jair telepathically, saying he must be the guy who performed the ghoul slash. But Jair tells them to get out of the way, saying they can't waste a single second, and they should know that. But one of them says he knows he can't do it because of orders. But Jair questions whose orders. Then he realizes they're using Defy the Heavens. So one of them asks what he's talking about, because the only heaven for them is the golden sky. And so the guy with the axe and the one with the spear charge at Jair, and he questions when they got there and tells Chung-Hu to dodge, throwing the boy back. And the two of them rush Jair, but he stops both their attacks, standing his ground. The protagonist realizes he resisted it well. Jair is surprised, because to think the Golden Sky sect managed to infiltrate even the innermost parts of the castle is too much. And Jair says you guys from the outer castle have certainly gotten bold, asking if they've forgotten who he is. But the two say he shouldn't think they're the same as before, and Jair attacks, knocking them back, telling them to think hard about it, because if they change their minds, the Castellan might still forgive them. But the two question Castellan, asking if he's talking about that thing locked in the basement, talking about that thing that can't even control its powers, let alone tell the difference between right and wrong, saying that's not the heaven they used to serve, asking if the captain of extermination, even in this situation, still wants to serve that thing. However, Jair says he still believes he'll come back, and one of them says that's why it's impossible to talk to him. The one with the hammer almost lands a huge blow to his face, and then a massive explosion occurs. The hammer wielder steps back to the spearman's side, saying that if he were a little smarter, they wouldn't have to fight, asking, "Isn't that right, Captain of Extermination?" He was really hit and sent flying into a house. He remembers that the two are only 4th stage adapters, and even both of them shouldn't be a match for a 5th stage adapter like him. So he questions why he can't keep up with their speed or their power level, noting that this isn't ordinary growth, and it's like ghoulification, thinking something is wrong and this is dangerous. And he tells the protagonist to run, but the protagonist attacks the guy right in front of Jair, saying that's payback for tossing him earlier. Jaehwan doesn't get it at all. Then, the shorty with the hammer says he couldn't hear his answer, and asks if he's the guy who can use the ghoul cut, and Jaehwan asks what he's going to do if he is. Then, the shorty says that just by looking at him, he seems like a non-adapted, saying he can tell whether it was just a rumor or not. He asks if he performed the ghoul cut using that sword, thinking this guy is less than half his size and he probably can't even throw a proper punch. However, Jaehwan asks, why punches? That's what he's talking about, appearing right behind him and landing a huge punch right in the shorty's face. And the skinny guy summons his defensive horn, but he doesn't have much time because Jaehwan gives him no opening. He feints with one hand and ends up using the other to hit him, saying that his defense has way too many openings. After all, he's defending with a broomstick, right? You could call it a broomstick. I don't think that's the best form of defense, like a thin little slat like that. Man, there's a ton of space to land a hit, and Jaehwan uses that opening to land a massive punch right on his chin, making him take a step back. He even tries to attack again, but Jaehwan calmly retreats. But in the middle of the attack, he changes the direction of his spear and tries to hit Jaehwan. But the kid manages to back away again, and the skinny guy comes at him once more. Then Jaehwan says he can feel an energy stronger than before, wondering what kind of energy it is, questioning if it's a thirst for revenge. But Jaehwan sees that's not it, because half of his mask is broken and he can see the psycho's face. This is while the skinny guy asks if he thinks someone like him can save the Castellan just by reaching the castle. And Jaehwan starts to notice that he's scared, surprised that he committed treason with so little courage, finding it hilarious. And he says he can't do things like saving people, because that's that old geezer's job over there. But then he stops the spear with just his feet, leaving the skinny guy completely stunned. Jaehwan is also stunned as he leaps on top of him, ready to stab, explaining to him that the story changes when they're talking about killing people. While the protagonist is outside dealing with those two, down in the underground where the Castellan is, Urin is with some other high-ranking officials. They say it hasn't even been a day since the ghoul cut was performed, and they question how he's already like this. Urin says he saw it with his own eyes, and the doctor came by in the morning, and both the ghoulification and the energies had calmed down. So he asks why he's like this again, wondering why this had to happen right when a glimmer of hope appeared that he could be cured. He says they could have cured him if the Castellan had lasted just one more month, but then the doctor says that's not possible now, stating that the protagonist's ghoul cut is merely an imitation. And unlike Mino's case, the Castellan's corruption is serious, and any normal person would have already turned into a ghoul a while ago. He's only lasted this long because he has a very strong will, but in a month, his ghoul cut might be something worth betting on. He says he's never tried it before, but it might be possible with two people, and, of all people, if it's him, it'll work. Urin doesn't like this at all, because one of them must know about Jaehwan, and he already knew for a while that there was a traitor among them. Then he said that people who can manipulate spiritual corruption have appeared. Urin is surprised it's like that, even if they aren't part of the Green Pieris clan, and he says that's exactly it, and that's why he wants to go see for himself. Urin is very surprised by this, reminding him that matters related to spiritual corruption are very dangerous, questioning why he doesn't send a captain or a minister. And he says that Urin has very little faith in him, and asks if he's forgotten who he is, saying he survived the hell of a war. He may have lost the war for the fruit, but he will continue and throw himself into matters concerning the lives of the people of Gorgon. But when the Castellan returned, he couldn't even believe he was in that state. He went out on an inspection and came back spiritually corrupted, and the people who saw it happen are in that room. He wonders if it was Mahan and speaks to all the guards, saying this is a serious situation, but he says it's dangerous, telling them they'll only go in when the doctor arrives. But Mahan says that if they delay this any further, it will be the end of Gorgon. However, Urin says they can't perform the ghoul cut if the doctor isn't there, asking if he's planning to kill the Castellan. And Mahan says he knows they can't defeat him even if they all charge in together. So Urin asks what he wants to do, and he says he will perform the ghoul seal. Then Urin is very surprised, saying no, that that's the last resort, but he says it will be too late if they wait any longer. And they need to at least preserve the Castellan's spiritual energy through the ghoul seal. However, Urin says they don't have a spectral crystal to be able to seal ghouls. But then Mahan calls the commander, saying that everyone already knows, and he doesn't need to hide anymore. He says he's arrived, and that guy brings something in a box, and that is the captain of the Black Shadows. Urin can't even believe it, because the captain of the Black Shadows is a member of the commander's faction, and also a traitor. And that box is the one holding the spectral crystal that Jaehwan had with him. And Mahan says this involves the future of Gorgon, asking why he was hiding such an important item, because he more than anyone should know what will happen if the Castellan becomes a real ghoul. In fact, he frames him, saying that he must have wanted to turn the Castellan into a mega ghoul, asking if that wasn't the plan. He says he saw with his own eyes how much of a threat just one medium ghoul managed to cause Gorgon. And mega ghouls are a calamity that command countless ghouls and bring ruin wherever they go, asking if he really wants that to happen. So Urin is left with nothing he can do, seeing that since the Castellan is enraged and the doctor isn't there, it makes his opinion valid. However, he says this isn't something just anyone can do simply because they have a spectral crystal. The ghoul seal is a secret technique of the Green Pieris clan, and he questions how he plans on bringing one of their clan members there now. But Mahan tells him not to worry, saying he has already called people who have learned this technique. But Urin sees that these people are not from the Green Pieris clan, and Mahan says no, but states they are capable of performing the seal. However, Urin thinks that things are very wrong here, and if the ghoul seal is performed like this, the Castellan's spiritual energy will be placed inside the crystal. And since energy is not hereditary in ghouls, if someone gets a hold of the spectral crystal with the Castellan's spiritual energy inside, that person could take the Castellan's spiritual energy and become the master of Gorgon. And if Gorgon falls into the wrong hands, everything will go down the drain. and he realizes it, noticing that there's someone else who can hold the spectral crystal without being a green Pyrrhus, besides an irregular like Jaehwan. And seeing that, he immediately remembers when the Castellan told him that people who can manipulate spiritual corruption had appeared. And he's in shock, connecting all the dots and realizing that from the Castellan's spiritual corruption, which happened half a year ago, to his rage today, all of it was part of the external commander's plans. And he tells the men, ordering them to stop the external commander, but none of them are willing to do it, as they've already been completely bought. And so Urine falls to the ground in despair, because all of them are involved in this. And so he thinks there's nothing he can do, apologizing to the Castellan. But as they cast that technique, Urine thinks that because of his own complacency, he wasn't able to protect Gorgon, saying he's so sorry as he cries. But then the whole ceiling starts to collapse. Pieces of stone fall down below, and a hole is torn open in the middle of the ceiling. They question what the hell happened, and when Urine looks up, they all notice Jaehwan arriving, and Mahan asks who the hell he is. Model. The being is there, but Jarir tells him to cut the crap, throwing a man down below, saying his blasphemy has already been exposed to the whole world. These guys have confessed everything, and Myron gets pissed off, while the little guy, all busted up on the ground, apologizes, but ends up exploding in front of everyone. And Jarir asks what the hell the external commander is doing. He says that now that their betrayal has been revealed, it seems they just offed themselves, and he asks if he should really be blaming himself for his inability to prevent a criminal's self-destruction. So Jarir asks, what the hell is this? Telling them to get ready, because that is blasphemy, saying that if the ghoul seal continues to progress, things will go exactly as the external commander planned. But everyone in that room points their sword at his neck. He asks what they're all doing, and they apologize to the extermination captain, telling him not to defy the will of external commander Myron, or rather, the Golden Sky sect, saying he needs to stay put until the Castellan seal is complete. And he screams at everyone, calling them traitors. And the protagonist tells Urine that he made him a false promise and that Gorgon can't guarantee his safety. And Urine questions what he's talking about. And the protagonist then says they're going to change the terms of their promise. Urine asks what he's talking about, and the protagonist says he'll save the Castellan and kill those traitors for him. In return, he must give him that old man, and he will bring back the Abyss Exploration Squad. By doing that, they'll be able to help him, and all three of them are shocked by what the kid is proposing. And Myron says he's great at spouting bullshit, saying he'd heard the rumors about the man who managed to kill a ghoul with a single thrust. He thought it was a lie, but it seems it was actually true. In that case, they'll need to give it everything they've got too, and they all charge forward as the protagonist wields his sword. While they're still in the air, he unleashes thrusts in every direction, killing them one by one. And that captain loses an arm. Then, looking to the side, they see that shit has hit the fan, and the protagonist keeps hitting everything that moves. He says they just keep coming at him, but even broken, they still keep trying to hit the protagonist. He sees there's no other way, using a normal frontal thrust and taking out a large number of them. And Myron even tries to stop the attack, but thinks that it won't work and is impossible to block. So, he tries to deflect it, sending it to another corner, and the Castellan is almost hit. Looking back, he gets scared, realizing that if he had tried to block it, he would have died. Urine is scared to death of that incredible destructive power, and they talk to the Elder Chief, asking what they should do, because continuing with the plan is still complicated, and if they can't maintain the ghoul seal, they'll have no choice but to go with Plan B, saying they must release the Black Cloud immediately, even if it annihilates all life in Gorgon. But the protagonist is listening to everything and speaks to Myron, as he already knows he is the external commander of Gorgon Castle, as well as the Elder Chief of the Golden Sky sect, saying he doesn't know what he's trying to do, nor why he's infecting the spirits. But there's one thing he does know. He likes people like him. The protagonist is preparing for an absurd attack, and Myron sees it coming. He says it doesn't matter what it is, telling them to get rid of it. Meanwhile, the protagonist says he's truly grateful that people like him exist. After all, because of that, he doesn't have to feel guilty for eradicating this world, launching the strongest thrust he has ever delivered on this planet, and it goes all the way to the sky, turning into a firework. And they are all amazed by it, and Urine can't even move. Meanwhile, Jarir tells him he needs to pull himself together, but he just stands there, looking at that overwhelming hope, and he remembers the Castellan's words to Urine that the people there need hope, a hope that will not waver before anything, an overwhelming hope. He says that feeling the overwhelming hope the Castellan spoke of, coming from a man who talks about the destruction of this world, is something he never expected. And after that attack, Myron is split in half. Actually, he was split into more pieces, but you can't even count them, and he says the kid is truly a monster, but it's too late, because the Castellan of Gorgon is already done for. but the protagonist goes over to finish what he started, shoving his sword in his face. Then Jarir calls the protagonist. He asks if the old man is still sleeping. He says no matter how much they shake him, he won't wake up. But the protagonist throws the old man against the wall with all his might. They question what he's doing, and the old man thinks that sensation is familiar, feeling a hell of a pain in his hip. Jarir says he should have just woken up on his own, calling him over quickly because the Castellan is on his last legs. But then he begins to move, as the target's spiritual corruption rate has exceeded 99.9% and ghoulification is imminent. The system begins to calculate the target's danger level, but concludes that it is impossible to calculate. The system's verdict is that it is a mega ghoul. They initiate Gorgon's automatic alarm system, and everyone starts running, trying to evacuate. The guard says everyone must be evacuated, without exception. They need to avoid any more incidents. And at that, James asks, "What the hell is this? What's happening in the castle?" Then the old man tells the extermination captain that he and the internal commander need to be evacuated and for the protagonist to lend a hand there, saying that his thrust is still too sharp to be able to save people. But the protagonist asks when he switched swords, and the old man gets pissed at him because he was the one who broke the other one. Then he says enough with the small talk, entering the world of paintings again to save the Castellan. But as he begins to create that work of art involving the Castellan to bring him back as he was before, he begins to see his memories. He tells the protagonist that the ghoul cut awakens forgotten memories like that, saying he also tried it during the incident with Mino. And as soon as it's full of memories, the most urgent problem will have been solved. But then someone disagrees with him, startling the old man, and he immediately remembers something he's seen in his life and asks that voice about the Castellan. Then that voice looks at him, and those eyes make him certain that this is not the Castellan. Then the Castellan actually opens his eyes and everyone thinks it's insane. The protagonist calls for the old man. The old man says that something is wrong, saying that this is something else and not the Castellan. Then he simply rips through all those chains, stands up, and becomes enormous in front of them. And with that, he opens those hideous eyes, looking at everyone and emanating that dark aura. He completes his transformation, floating in the air. And so the old man is certain that it's not the Castellan and that this is something he had spoken of before. And when that thing steps on the ground, they feel the pressure. That thing says it's surprising, because to think it would arrive here through that body is just too much. And that thing is pure hatred. It says that, in the end, this man also became a ghoul, and he is seeing a familiar face there. He starts smiling at the doctor, calling him an incomplete awakened one, and asking why he is still in chaos. He asks if, 900 years ago, he didn't get what he wanted in the abyss. And the old man says that he is the master of the Palace of Ghouls, located in the center of chaos, and the only being capable of opening a portal to the abyss, the one catastrophe king. The protagonist thinks that even using suspicion, he doesn't know what this thing is, and starts to get annoyed with the situation. Then, the one king enjoys the situation, amusing himself with their fear. The protagonist notices that it's similar to a ghoul, but it isn't, and questions what the hell this is. And that thing just waves its hand, asking why he didn't leave chaos, spreading its influence everywhere and undoing the old man's world. Apparently, the old man didn't leave so he could save that tainted world. But the doctor is surprised, because with just a wave of his hand, he completely erased the world that he himself had built. And so the Soul King keeps smiling in that situation and notices that the Jaehwan is an interesting human, so much so that even though he's fully awakened, he still has a human heart. And so the old man thinks that the Soul King's power is descended from ghouls, and the Soul King must have taken possession of the Castellan's body using it. So what they're seeing now is a mere shadow of the Soul King, but he's already trembling all over, thinking that if a presence that's just a shadow is this overwhelming, imagine the real thing. And he sees the monster as hundreds of times larger than it really is because of that pressure. But the Jaehwan calls out to the old geezer, asking if he failed, and now he says he's just going to kill that thing. And so the king questions him about killing him. What the hell is he talking about? Killing the great Soul King? Then he starts to stretch his neck, and his head moves away from his body, forming an L shape and laughing at the Jaehwan, saying he's a funny guy. My friend, this right here is terrifying. If I saw this in the middle of the night, I wouldn't go to the bathroom or even look in the mirror, dude. Are you crazy? Turn a light on. Keep the light on. And the doctor tells the Jaehwan that he can't, because this isn't something that can be killed or stopped. And not even Moloch could do anything against him. And this might just be a shadow, but it's still very strong. However, the Jaehwan tells him not to be afraid, because he can win. And at this, the old man questions how he can remain so calm in front of such an absurdly powerful being. But then the king starts to laugh out loud, completely mocking what the Jaehwan is saying. Then he simply snaps his neck back into place and looks at the boy. But this time he pulls an Orochimaru, spitting a sword out of his mouth, telling him he can come if he wants, grabbing it with both hands and pulling out that great sword, calling him a foolish, awakened one with a human heart, preparing to really go head-to-head with the Jaehwan. And the creature is dying to get into a brawl with him. Are we going to see the use of a serious thrust? Will we? Will we? A thrust. Oh man, this is about to get good, huh? And at that, the old man recognizes that weapon as the Void Sword, a frightening weapon that instantly turned half of the expedition squad into ghouls at the entrance to the abyss. He was able to see this weapon one more time, but he certainly didn't want to. Then the king of the abyss charges at the Jaehwan, but he manages to get out of the way of that attack by a hair's breadth, almost getting hit. He says he's seen that expression before, and that he's heading to the abyss. And the old man gets desperate, because he didn't know that. And he says he already knew that Brat was weird, but he never imagined he'd have these intentions. And the king is surprised that there are still people who want to reach the end of that world with everything they've got. That's not enough. Then he grabs the Jaehwan's head, saying that he's even weaker than that nightmare from 900 years ago. The Jaehwan can barely break free, but he jumps away, dodging the Castellan's sword at the last moment, getting out of the way, and ends up managing to land a thrust on the thing's arm, ripping it off. And so, he thinks that was good, because he tore off one of his arms. Now they'll take it slow. But then that arm he tore off comes back at the Jaehwan in the same way. And he doesn't understand a thing, only having a chance to barely dodge those attacks, almost taking one to the chin before landing another thrust in the middle of that ghoul's body. However, it keeps attacking as if nothing happened, and so he manages to grab part of the Jaehwan's cloak. He says that corruption is a disease of time, and now the Jaehwan's arm is wounded. And the king says that a single glance at the Void Sword will make hundreds of years, or rather, thousands of years pass. The soul cannot bear this time, aging and becoming corrupted, and thus he will become a ghoul. But the Jaehwan says that's not going to work, as he himself stabs that piece of flesh, completely tearing it out, saying that he just needs to rip out his soul. And so the king is surprised that he tore out a part of his aged soul with a sane mind, saying that he has astonishing willpower. However, he says that this is the end. Then he starts pulling more swords from his body, and the Jaehwan is horrified by that, by the sheer number of swords that are there. And the king prepares to control these swords, manipulating them telepathically to throw them at the Jaehwan. What a beautiful panel, for real. This manhwa is so well drawn. And then he really launches those great swords at the Jaehwan, and the old man ducks right there, because he knows there's not much he can do. Then the king says that now that he's stopped to analyze it, that sword in his sheath is a replica of the Tower of Nightmares, and says it's excellent for a toy created by a nightmare. And the Jaehwan tries to do everything he can to not get hit by those weapons. The old man starts getting worried about him, but the Jaehwan just says that he already knows what to do, planting his sword in the ground and preparing for the king's next attack. And the king really does come, but the Jaehwan stops his sword with him still in the air, and the old man ends up being thrown backward. And so, while the king whispers in front of him that if he keeps resisting like this, his soul won't last, and the Jaehwan thinks that he's right, and he can't win like this, saying he can't see a weak spot, no matter how many times he uses suspicion. The strange particles make it difficult to concentrate in this place. But the Jaehwan remembers when the doctor told him that his unique world is called the world marked in white, a world created by his ideal of keeping alive the memories of everyone who disappeared. And every awakened one has their own world, and the form of this world is determined by the key word they obtained upon awakening, along with the most powerful emotion or desire they were awakened with. The more existences he can take into his own unique world. And the Jaehwan then thinks that if that's the case, it's time to turn the tables, throwing the Soul King's sword back as he himself launches over there, fully activating his world. And it's the world of oblivion. And with that, the entire world there really changes, as that tree and the eye appear, and the king begins to see it. Then the doctor thinks that this is hell, and this really is hell, realizing that he has been living in a world like this the whole time, a hellish landscape where only hatred and anger against the world exist. And at this, the king asks if this is his ideal, finding it interesting. But the Jaehwan shoves his sword right into the middle of his mouth, without even giving him a chance to resist, and says that at least he's not seeing those annoying particles anymore. And with that, several of the king's teeth fly out of his mouth, and he starts to laugh even while taking that hit. Then several vines shoot out from his body towards the Jaehwan, and he gets up once more, looking the boy right in the eye with that all-busted mouth, saying that he continues to foolishly challenge him, with no knowledge of how to finish him off. Then he raises his hand, throwing the Jaehwan down this time and pinning the boy there. And the Jaehwan feels an incredible amount of pain as the king pins him deeper and deeper into the ground, opening a hole there. And at this, the doctor is scared shitless as water comes out of that hole, and the king starts to step on the Jaehwan's chest, saying that he, who did not give up on hatred, was an interesting existence that he hadn't seen in a long time. And so he pulls out his sword once more, ready to stab the Jaehwan and kill him, saying that it was fun, which is a shame. But before he could kill the Jaehwan, he opens his eyes in the most classic protagonist power-up style ever. But then, before he could do anything, the Jaehwan simply launches an attack from below, hitting him right in the middle. Then the king is quite surprised, and the Jaehwan says that it was fun, but he's just getting started. And the dude is back for round 2, and the king says that this is hilarious because he can't even inflict a single wound on him. And he begins to reform himself even after falling, and comes together once more, becoming even uglier. And the Jaehwan questions, "What the hell is this now?" But he's looking like an Elden Ring boss. Then the monster tries to attack him again, but the Jaehwan gets out of the way. However, the monster throws its hand at the Jaehwan, who defends himself, but it swats him and pins him to a wall. The boy starts to spit up a bit of blood. At this, the king charges at him again, but the Jaehwan dodges and appears behind him, preparing another thrust. However, that monster turns towards the Jaehwan's attack just in time, looking at him and deflecting that thrust. And the king says that for the last several 100,000 years, he has witnessed the existences that established the world. And all of them climbed this tree carrying different questions. And he looks deep into the protagonist, asking what kind of answers he's seeking up there, carrying a world like that, and what his question is, before attacking the boy again. But the protagonist manages to block the king's attack, who says he's starting to understand, stating that this world itself is his question. So he questions what this world is to him: destruction, annihilation, or eradication. And he begins to realize that for the protagonist, this world is the apocalypse. And that is the only name that fits that world, saying it's a very arrogant world, since a mere human is questioning the value of existence at the Mirage Tree itself. And he asks if the kid is questioning this, following his world's standards, and attacks him again. And the protagonist starts to flee, but also asks him what the hell he's talking about. And the king doesn't understand a thing, but starts to realize that it wasn't a question then. And so the protagonist gets back into his stance to launch an even bigger attack. And he says that he's experienced this situation somewhere before, fighting against that demon. And he remembers it, realizing that this guy in front of him is the shadow that fell upon the Castellan, which means he can still do something. He prepares a thrust, and the king becomes alert. But the protagonist launches his attack too fast for him to do anything. And after that, the king is almost fading away, calling the protagonist an arrogant man. He asks if the protagonist doesn't understand that he's incapable of killing him, but with each of his attacks, it just gets uglier and uglier, saying it's utter insolence and this is getting boring. And he's going to finish the protagonist once and for all, lunging at the boy, literally wanting to devour Jaehwan. But then he draws his sword, preparing the next attack. As he jumps, he starts to see those same lines that show the weak point, and he says he knew he was connected to his body. And with that, he strikes right where the connection is. And the king thinks it's impossible, because it's a fission ability. At that, he drives his sword in as hard as he can, and the king calls him an existence that lives for the apocalypse, saying he'll be waiting for him at the entrance to the abyss. And with that, he finally gets out of there. And the protagonist is all broken, with 2 huge chunks of his arms missing. And he went through all that hell just for a shadow of what the king is. And he starts to think that he needs to get stronger and needs more than just thrusts. He specifically remembers the heavy thrust. It's a good skill for facing an army, but against a powerful individual, the area of effect is too wide to be effective. And this time, he only managed to use it as a distraction to buy time. And he's going to need a new skill specialized for facing a single individual. And after that, the old man is collapsed on the ground, and Jarir arrives with Yaren. But just then, the Castellan calls out to the protagonist. He sees that the Castellan is still alive and asks if the protagonist can come closer. He says he became a ghoul, but he kept watch because he's very grateful that he faced the one king, and then grabs the protagonist's arm. But he doesn't like this at all. However, the Castellan says that maybe now is the time for Gorgon to change, asking him to accept this. He begins to pour his power into the protagonist's arm. Then a branch appears there, and he says that it gives off a familiar aura, remembering Aranir, the old man, and also Mina and all the others who live in the city, saying he can feel comforting memories, asking him to please not forget his human heart. Then, after a while, Jamie arrives, asking if everyone is okay, and the old man can only complain about his back. But when they look to the side, they see the protagonist approaching and also notice that symbol on his arm, a symbol that goes from his shoulder to his wrist. And with that, all of them kneel before the protagonist. And Yaren is surprised, thinking about the Castellan, finally understanding, thinking that if this is his wish, then so be it. At which point Yaren salutes the new Castellan of Gorgon, and they all bow to the protagonist. And so, 2 days later, Yaren goes to the protagonist, who doesn't want to do anything. He says he's not the Castellan, and has already told him he's not doing this. But Yaren says he seems to have forgotten the details of his promise, and that he will remind him, The protagonist's promise was to save the Castellan and kill the traitors, and Yuren's promise was to help organize the expedition squad to the Abyss. And the protagonist asks if he's talking about responsibility because the Castellan is dead. He says it's something like that. So the protagonist says, the Castellan is dead, but since he, the new Castellan, is alive, there's no problem. And so, Yuren says that's certainly right. He will also have to keep his promise in the future, since Lord Jaehwan is now the Castellan. And the protagonist hates this, questioning how things ended up this way. He doesn't have time to waste in that castle. He needs to keep moving forward and go to the Abyss. And he asks Yuren if he can pass the position of Castellan to someone else. But he immediately refuses, saying it's impossible, since Gorgon wouldn't recognize them. And the protagonist is surprised, wondering if by Gorgon he means that symbol, noticing that he was chosen by that thing. And Yuren says that's why the position isn't something that can just be passed on to someone else whenever you want, because the only time the Castellan of Gorgon changes is when the former title holder dies. Besides, those documents need to be dealt with today, and since he just became the Castellan, he also included records and other information in there. And the protagonist immediately grabs them to read, noticing a very peculiar law. The first one states that insulting the Castellan in the street results in public flogging. The second time will result in the removal of the soul, and the third time will result in the complete annihilation of the soul. And the protagonist starts to realize that's why everyone is saying such nice things about the Castellan. And Yuren tells him to feel free to use the objects on the table. He's going to organize the books and asks him to call if he needs anything. However, the protagonist pulls open a drawer and sees a ball of paper there, noticing it's from the 17th Castellan. It congratulates the boy, even though he doesn't even know who he was when he recorded the letter. And if he found it, it must mean he is the new Castellan. And even the little paper doll acts all laid back. He says the protagonist must be thinking a lot about how to rule Gorgon Castle, and the protagonist questions what this is, wondering if it's a magic paper. Noticing it's not a doll made with psychic power, the Castellan tells him to relax, because the Castellan only has one job, which is to seek pleasure, and a good Castellan is one who has a lot of fun. He should leave public security to the administrative division, internal affairs to the internal commander, and external affairs to the external commander. They will take very good care of everything. He's not the first to give this advice. This is wisdom passed down through generations of Castellans, and the protagonist realizes that all the previous Castellans were lazy. And the Castellan says that according to Ryung's statistics, half of the Castellans were overworked, and this accelerated their spiritual corruption, resulting in their deaths. And the protagonist notes that this advice isn't just for him, but also for the good of Gorgon. He hopes he won't be greedy, telling him not to try to change anything, and not to try too hard, because everyone there is aware that this world cannot change. And that's why in this world, what's needed isn't change, but rather a prolongation of life. Therefore, he shouldn't do anything for the sake of the many, but instead seek changes for the sake of the few. And he pleads for the boy to please not be greedy. All while emanating that aura, he says that the only good Castellan in chaos is a Castellan who does nothing, and the protagonist says he's starting to understand the kind of existence the Castellan of this place is, an existence that loses hope for the sake of staying alive. But then, Yuren goes up to him, asking what's making him so worried, and the Prota speaks with him, saying he's going to eliminate the Castellan of Gorgon, and Yuren asks what that means. And the Prota says he has to start there, asking Yuren what a castle is. Then he says that's a strange question, saying that a castle is a fortress, and a fortress is a military structure that protects allies from enemies. And the Prota asks, and what if the enemies no longer exist? What will happen if no one ever invades the castle? And so Yuren is surprised, thinking that the castle will no longer have a reason to exist. In that case, a Castellan won't be necessary. However, he says that a castle without enemies, something like that, is impossible. But the Prota says yes, it is possible, because he will unify chaos. Whoa, hold on there, Targaryen. Go for it. Unify the 7 kingdoms. I'm talking about this because I started with House of the Dragon, finished it, or as far as it's been released, and now I'm moving on to Game of Thrones. I will not read your comment if it has any kind of spoiler, and I will also block you from the channel. Oh, but it came out in 2011? Yeah, I'm only watching it now. I'm late to the party and I don't want spoilers. Please, don't make me block your messages forever here on the channel. Let's go. In a while, I'll come back to tell you I've reached the final season. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I'll definitely see you in the next one, because you've already left a like, already commented down below, already hyped it up, and also already subscribed and remembered to check if you're subscribed. And if you did all that, we'll definitely see each other in the next video, and I'll see you there. I'm out.